OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
A very good morning to you. Welcome along to OTB AM. It's Jerry Gilroy and Eoin Sheehan with you every weekday morning from 7:30 all the way through until 10. Hope you enjoyed your bank holiday weekend, and if you've got anything you'd like to get off your chest this morning, you can WhatsApp us. 0879 180 180 is the number, or of course you can leave a comment on whatever social stream you're watching or listening to us here on OTB AM this morning. Eoin, good morning to you.
Good morning, Jer.
How are you?
Yeah, very well. Very well. Enjoyed the bank holiday. How could you not enjoy that sort of weekend?
It's a big day for you, Eoin.
It is a truly big day. It's Kerry Mount Rushmore morning, but I didn't really study that hard in the lead up to my leaving cert. Didn't do the same for my college exams, but this was very much different. There was no procrastination involved for this. 3 weeks ago, I had my Kerry Mount Rushmore picked well ahead of time. So basically just been sitting on it for the last 3 weeks. Haven't budged, but I have been pushed. But my opinion has not changed.
So I was wondering how you feel in a morning like this. If you were to describe it, you're not married yet, but it feels like a cross between your confirmation and your wedding day, I suspect.
Yeah, exactly. This is the sort of butterflies that you have. Like, I guess I don't know. You could probably tell me this, Ger, but I guess when you get married, there's a certain sense of definition to what is going to happen. All going well, you can predict what is going to happen, and you can get your ducks in a row quite nicely for the day to run smoothly. This is very akin to that, and as I say, my ducks have been in a row for quite some time.
We have an all-star guest list of people who are going to help Eoin to make his decision. Micheal O'Muircheartaigh is going to join us at 8 o'clock. We're going to have Kieran Donaghy along at 9 for the duration of that conversation, and Paul Galvin will make a last pitch a little bit later on as well. That's coming up between 8 and 9. I'm going to tell you as well, Shane Hannon is going to join us for sports news around about 25 past 8. We'll bring you the sports pages at about 8:35. But we want to go to the US, which obviously has seen an eruption of very aggressive policing over the last 3 days, mostly in response to peaceful protests. There has subsequently been looting, and over the last 6 or 7 hours or so, Donald Trump has come out and given a press conference. We're heading over to the West Coast to join Kavitha Davidson to talk to us a little bit about what's going on. Kavitha, first off, you're very welcome. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
What actually happened overnight for people who are just waking up in Ireland?
Well, so for the last couple of days, there's been a pretty steady wave of protesting in cities throughout America. They're mostly peaceful in the daytime, and then cities have imposed curfews. And what starts as peaceful protesting turns into violence and destruction and some looting. And there's some pretty substantiated reports that the looting is outside agitators, it's outside groups trying to stir trouble and trying to kind of paint a negative light on the very peaceful protesters that have mostly been marching through the country.
Yeah, you've seen those pictures of the protests all day. You've seen the individual reporting of people who are at them, and it's clear the protests have been peaceful to 95, 97, 99% of the time. That message doesn't seem to have got through to Donald Trump. I just want to play this clip. Here is Trump addressing the nation last night. Have a look.
I am taking immediate presidential action to stop the violence and restore security and safety in America. I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans, including your Second Amendment rights. Therefore, the following measures are going into effect immediately. First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now. Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
It's chilling, really, that this is his response to what's happened over the last 3 or 4 days, but they couldn't respond like this to save the thousands and thousands of people who have died from COVID-19.
It really is very telling. It's telling that there's a lot more outrage and there's a lot more, frankly, violent rhetoric against looters and rioters than there is about, hundreds of Black men and women being shot down by police in our streets. We saw something really phenomenal and something that I've never really seen in my lifetime from an American president before, which was, one, the threat of military force against civilians for protesting, which he did in the daytime. And then he did something which will be on the front page of the New York Times, but it can't be overstated what he did. He had, in the middle of the day before curfew was imposed in Washington, D.C., cops in riot gear launched tear gas at peaceful protesters simply because of the photo op. There are multiple outlets that have reported that he was unhappy with the coverage that was given when he went into hiding in a bunker near the White House yesterday, and the coverage was not that positive. So in order to make a show of force, he tear gassed peaceful protesters in the middle of the day.
The other thing that he mentioned in that one, so that's a 6-minute clip. We just played a minute of it there. He talked about the Second Amendment rights. That's code for those people who are bearing arms, who we've seen kind of around the fringes of protests. There was one scene in Seattle where an undercover cop actually seized an assault rifle from somebody who was, it seemed like they were looking for trouble. And so essentially what he's saying is, if you are of a mind to bring your assault rifle to a riot, off you go, lads, and we'll have your back for that.
Yeah, it's absolutely frightening. And I can imagine how, those of you who aren't in America can be extremely confused by that, because obviously y'all don't have the gun culture that we do, but also you wouldn't have the leader of your country inciting that. He's very much inciting violence. And frankly, just for context for some of your viewers, this is part of a historical pattern. This is a tactic that Nixon used in his campaign to establish himself as, quote unquote, the law and order president. Obviously, in the late 60s, in a time of great civil unrest. So this is right out of a playbook where the president of the United States, President Trump, is trying to incite violence, and he's trying to sow discord. And he wants, if he wants people to exercise their Second Amendment rights in the middle of protests that are already volatile, a couple of weeks after we've seen people protesting, the COVID-19 shutdown by storming state capitals, also armed. He's going to get the violent outcome he seems to be seeking right now.
And we're in the middle of a campaign, so all of this has to be viewed through the campaign prism as well. What do you think is going to happen? How do we de-escalate this situation that we find ourselves in at the moment?
There's obviously a lot of rage. Like I said, most of the protesters are peaceful. There are definitely protesters who are angry and are hurt. But this does take de-escalation on the part of the police force. You have a lot of reports on the ground that these protests are peaceful until antagonism by police forces, before curfews are imposed even. So, we've seen some videos across the country that, some people call it propaganda, that it's propaganda for cops, and some people take it as very encouraging signs of, cops putting down their batons and taking off their helmets and just talking to these crowds. Because the underlying issue here really is that the police, who are, meant to serve and protect these communities, often don't connect with the communities they're supposed to be serving. So, we have seen some videos of cops kneeling with protesters and hugging protesters and understanding them in the daytime. And then by night, things kind of take a huge turn. But more of that de-escalation, more of that understanding, and frankly, we're not going to get it, but more leadership and more calming leadership at the top would be really nice to see.
Kavitha, could I just ask, in your view, how significant this feels in a historical context? That if you go back to the LA riots, does this feel this is on a level above that? Does this feel that there are different sides of the community coming together more than they've ever done in a protest fashion?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I feel like we feel like it's a watershed moment every time something like this happens. I think back to, 2016, when Eric Garner in Staten Island in New York, he's the first one that we had on tape saying, "I can't breathe" at the hands of a police officer. We go back to Mike Brown in Ferguson, St. Louis, near St. Louis, Trayvon Martin. Like, we can go down the line. In the last 3 weeks, the reason that this is at such a boiling point is because we've not just had George Floyd in Minnesota. We've also had Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. We've had Ahmaud Arbery in Florida, in Georgia. I'm sorry. So it does feel like every time this happens, we feel like it's a watershed moment. This does feel different. And I'll say that because this seems to, the video that we have at least 3 angles. It seems like every day we have a new angle released. But the video that we have is of this man begging for his life, at some point calling for his dead mother. It's like you can't be a human being and not feel something, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on. When you're watching that. So what we're seeing right now is, obviously we're seeing nationwide protests. We're seeing people kind of on both sides of the aisle coming together. We have yet to see top level Republican leadership denounce what we've seen here. But, we're also seeing as much diversity in these protests than frankly I've ever seen. And I've been in quite a few Black Lives Matter protests in the last 6 years. And we're also seeing that in sports. We're seeing more white athletes, frankly, and more people in baseball and hockey, and not just basketball and football, speaking out against this. So it does feel like this is a watershed moment. But what will really need to happen is, obviously we're going to need a conviction of the cop who was arrested. People are calling for the arrest of the 3 bystander cops who stood by and did nothing. But the more systemic change that we need, police reforms and an independent review, frankly, independent prosecution of cops when they're accused of doing something like this, because we've been dealing with this for decades, and nothing systemic has actually changed.
Just on that point of a lot of sports people coming to the fore to make their voices loud and clear, Kavitha, is this a sense that this is on a greater volume than it was in 2016? Because it did feel around that time as well, there were perhaps people using their social media platform for a time and then perhaps faded into the background. It does feel that there is a lot more people coming to the fore very quickly. I mean, like, you look at it on a global level, we even have Jadon Sancho being part of the protest and his celebration in the Bundesliga at the weekend.
Yeah, we've seen demonstrations in the Bundesliga. There was a huge protest in Trafalgar Square in London. This does seem like a global thing. In the sports world, in 2016, after Eric Garner died, we had LeBron James and Chris Paul, Carmelo Anthony standing up at the ESPYs and talking about that. We had WNBA players team-wide giving demonstrations. And then, of course, we had Colin Kaepernick and the whole debate that his demonstration spurred. But it does feel like this is much more widespread. This is, we're seeing official team accounts, which is really quite something. Not only have we seen, players and coaches in white and black, we're seeing, for example, the Miami Dolphins releasing statements and half of the NHL teams releasing statements, on behalf of their team, which is something that we haven't really seen before. You can kind of be cynical, and I tend to be, which is that this is just so egregious and so, there kind of isn't 2 sides to this when you watch that video, that it's an easy PR play for these teams to be making a stand. But the other side of that is they never really have before. So it does feel like this is different, and it does feel like this would have to stick. The other side of that is George Floyd, in particular, was best friends with an athlete. He was best friends with Steven Jackson, an NBA great, NBA Finals champion from the late 90s. But Steven Jackson has taken it upon himself to be the kind of first athlete face of talking about this in this particular issue, because he was so close with George Floyd. So it feels like you're seeing people rally around Steven and rally around other athletes in a way that, you don't just have to be of the stature of a LeBron James or a Serena Williams to be talking about this.
Michael Jordan obviously issued a statement as well through the Charlotte Hornets account as well, which was interesting. It wasn't, obviously everybody's going to read whatever he says. It's going to be amplified. But what did you make of that?
Yeah, Michael Jordan speaking out is interesting. Tiger Woods released a statement today as well. These are Black athletes that famously have not been the most involved politically. Here in the States, we just finished watching that great ESPN 10-part documentary, The Last Dance, about Michael. And, the famous line, Republicans buy sneakers too, of why he'd always kind of stayed apolitical in order to maintain his brand. I think it's interesting. I think that Michael Jordan's brand is enhanced, frankly, in 2020 when he does speak about these issues. And, you have scores of Black men and Black teenagers who are NBA fans who have always been disappointed that Michael Jordan hasn't been more vocal about things. On the other hand, that's always been his prerogative. So, you could see it as he finally gets it, or he finally has reached a level of his brand that it doesn't matter what he says and he can take a stand, or you could say he's being opportunistic. But it has been interesting to see players that we normally don't hear from, whether they're Black or white, talking about this issue.
Yeah, Joe Burrow, the #1 overall pick of the most recent NFL draft, came out very early on and actually spoke out about it, which is a fairly interesting signifier about what his intentions are when he gets to the NFL, of actually being an outspoken participant in the real world as opposed to just a marketing machine.
Yeah, and Joe Burrow is a really fascinating guy. He comes from a very poor white, rural background, and he's talked a lot about that as well, about white poverty in America, which is its own thing. But it is, he hasn't taken a single professional snap, but he has spoken out about this, and it was quite a tone setter. Like I said, we're hearing from white players throughout sports. We're hearing specifically from white quarterbacks, which is, the history of race, in particularly the quarterback position in the NFL, is such a fraught one. And obviously all of the power on and off the field is concentrated to the quarterback position. So to see, the Carson Wentz's and the Joe Burrows and even Trevor Lawrence in college, we're seeing these white quarterbacks really take it upon themselves. I think it's a sign of the times. It's a sign of sea change, and it's also a sign of, frankly, I think every generation gets more woke, for lack of a better word, gets more progressive, and has more of an understanding of these issues. So, hopefully it's a sign of a trend to start.
That's a really interesting point, that if society is going to get more conscientious about these things, more woke, as you say, as the years go by, the Michael Jordan example is quite a fascinating one then at this point, because as you say, it is totally his prerogative to not speak out when he wanted to. But this is the early 90s we're talking about, when Republicans Buy Sneakers Too comes out. This, hopefully, it becomes a vastly different scenario for an athlete to talk out, to speak out. If these protests result in something meaningful, the next Michael Jordan may then be comfortable to, publicly support somebody in a fairly divisive political race, as was the case in North Carolina in the early 90s.
Well, the next Michael Jordan is LeBron James, and he has been extremely vocal and very activist. And he's got this great HBO show called The Shop, where they speak very frankly about race and about political issues. What we also do forget sometimes about Michael Jordan is he was the first Black billionaire athlete. He created that as a business model. He was the first who created that path for people like LeBron James, who has said he has aspirations of owning a team at some point. That would not have been possible without the branding genius and the way that Michael Jordan paved for future generations. So it really is a little bit of a give or take here. Also, like you said, the mid-90s was not the mid-2010s or 2020. It wasn't. We very much were still in a you have to stick to sports mentality, and I know that that's something that people still throw around now. LeBron James has been told to shut up and dribble, but it's not, at the end of the day, detrimental to these athletes' brands. And once you've reached the wealth and the status of a LeBron James, you have the luxury of being able to speak about these things. Serena Williams has said, she's never been quiet about race, but you can tell going back 20 years from when she was being called the N-word in Indian Wells in California and refused to ever play that course again, that court again. You can tell that every year she has gotten more strong and more successful and more comfortable speaking out about the injustices that she sees. So, without Michael Jordan really kind of paving the way for the money and for the success, I don't know if we would have a LeBron James, but that does also pave the way for generations of activist athletes to come.
Kavitha, you've been great with your time. Thanks very much for joining us late night there, early morning here. Take care.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's Kavitha Davidson there of The Athletic. You can listen to her podcast, The Lead. Right, we're going to take a quick break. If you want to get involved in the conversation this morning, 087 9180 180 is the WhatsApp number. We're going to bring you some of the Sunday paper review now. Clean O'Connor was on alongside Neil and Timmy McCarthy, I think, as well, as part of this as well. So they talk about a bunch of different things, including a brilliant piece that we have up on offtheball.com, an interview with Gina Akpi-Moses that Arthur O'Dea did, which is well worth your time. Have a look.
For me, Neil, I think that Shane McGrath's piece is very interesting because he talks about science. We're living in abnormal circumstances, and what's happening right now as the lockdown is getting released, we're trying to revert to normality, and that's really a conflict. You can't have normality in abnormal circumstances, and sport for all of us is the biggest loss. For all of us who love watching sport and for those of us who play sport, that's the biggest loss, and particularly the GA, which is our national sport. And this time of the year, with the weather being so fine, we all, say it'd be great to go to a match this afternoon, or it'd be great to go to a club match or an inter-county match. But the reality is this virus has not gone away. And I think one of the risks that we face is that we're putting a huge amount of pressure on the GA. I mean, Pat Spillane last week and others, Colin O'Rourke has been advocating it, and a lot of significant, key people in the GA family and fraternity have been talking about that this should be reopened. I think Shane McGrath is right. I think it's a scientific issue. I disagree with John Green saying that, Leitrim should be allowed open and Sligo, because, as Clean said, it's a national organisation. So what about the people in Dublin? So they have to make national decisions. You can't have an organisation which, says, well, we're really a national organisation, but when the pressure comes under us, we'll make, sort of different decisions. And I think that the challenge for the GA is to have the courage to stay with the scientific, measured approach. Now, it's not easy. One is that I think is the big question is, will they play a championship in 2021 or 2020? And forget what's happening in professional sports, in the Bundesliga and the Premiership, because that's about money. That's about TV money and contracts. So, it's not the same agenda here. What we have in Ireland is a pure sport played by phenomenal sports people, men and women. And we've got to make sure that when they play it, there's no risk to either of them. There's no risk to anybody involved in the game, and there's no risk to the families of anybody who's participated, whether it be stewards, referees, players, selectors, or whatever, in that sense. So I'm more on the Shane McGrath side that science should dictate this. And, there's a big question mark at the moment in Ireland about the 2 metres and the 1 metre social distancing. Right now it's 2 metres. We should just follow the rules of 2 metres.
This period has really empowered players because, okay, we're team sport athletes, we're team sport players. We like being in the group. As a coach, you think you're wonderful and you have to be in the centre of everything, and they can't survive without you. But I've learned in the last 10, 12 weeks, they can survive without you. Maybe they need a bit of guidance, but I've seen my local GAA team here. I drive by a public pitch and I see them out on their own, doing their running, doing all sorts of stuff, really taking ownership of their own training, developing their own skills without me having to motivate them. So there's still an opportunity for players to train and for players to develop, even in the current climate, which as a coach, you kind of have to be humble sometimes and realise they can do a lot more. I don't have to be standing over them all the time. That there's plenty that can be done right now.
We've just a couple of minutes before we have to take an ad break, but quickly on that one, Cliona, do you think, from the coaching point of view, that what we're all going through right now and when we actually do come back, are players going to start enjoying the game a little bit more, making a point of actually enjoying it rather than getting stressed out about the win-loss element?
Well, I think they're players, so they're always going to be competitive, and they'll definitely always be ambitious for the win. But I do think they realise what they're missing. So even for me, from coaching, like I realise what I get out of a team training session now, what it brings you, and I know the players feel the same. So they love the training, the physical training. Yes, I'm getting fitter, I'm getting faster, but the bit they miss is those sessions 3 or 4 times a week when you're with like-minded people. So I think we will, I suppose, savour those trainings a lot more when we get back to them.
One of you mentioned undivided support a little while ago, but this line, Scallon met Pat Horan in Croke Park in recent years and had a perfectly civil drink, a few drinks after a match. No mention was made of '96. That first night when Wexford celebrated their Ireland win was almost 24 years ago. Scallon's mother made a beeline for Horan at the post-match banquet and emptied some of her frustrations, but mothers are rarely impartial.
Love it. Like, you can see it happening.
Oh, you can picture it.
Where are you? Yeah. My son.
And in that moment, okay, all she's concerned about is her son. Wexford have won, they're all celebrations, but her son has been dumped on. And in her mind, and obviously, and I think Cleana's point again, the fact that players look back, if you ask any of those Wexford panel, they just say we won the All-Ireland. Yeah. They don't pick out moments, of, I did this. I mean, maybe Tom Dempsey might talk about a goal he got, but in general, they won the All-Ireland. Yeah. I think that the mother story is actually, I think that's a brilliant story. I just thought to myself, whoa, but look, my own mother sadly has passed on, God rest her soul. But all our mothers will do that for us. They see us as the best of all, and it doesn't matter whether we are or not. They see us as the best, and that's what matters for them.
Yeah. While I'm on that note, actually, I think I might throw out as well, it's my own mother's birthday today. So, Ma'am, happy birthday! I hope you're listening at home. We've been missing a trip down to Limerick for quite some time. It's January since I was last back in Limerick, so hopefully in the next couple of months I'll get down. And also as well, another birthday at home, my little niece, Emily. She was 1 on Friday as well, so a couple of big birthdays in the Tracy house. So I said I'd get those out of the way and put them in as well. So, no, it is just a very funny image of, I would say, the embarrassment of being sent off in an All-Ireland final briefly being taken over by the fact that your mother has decided to go up and berate the referee on your behalf. Yeah.
The issue I see for them will be, first of all, will they get some people, will they get the qualifying time? But I think the bigger issue will be if the Olympics is on in 2021 as currently is planned, and we stay, on a scientific road that's going to have us behind the curveball of other countries. Doesn't mean the other countries are right or wrong now. It just means that we've decided, to take, to be on this journey. It means that when they get to compete in Tokyo next year, they'll be behind the curveball. No matter what they do, they'll be behind the curveball. And then we'll be questioning why we send him, because we won't have as many medals, or any medals, depending on the circumstances. And that becomes more pressure. But I think that, the point Cleana made is very valid. You cannot make exemptions. I was listening to the news where we were on break there, and a professor came out talking against the risk. And South Korea went back into lockdown last night because they opened it out, and all of a sudden the virus returned more aggressively. So we've got to be very careful. This is sport, guys. People are losing their lives. Healthcare people are putting their lives on the line. This is just sport. And for all of us who love sport, I happened to play in 2 pre-Olympics in the 80s, so I know what this is about, the effort you have to put to get to the international level. But the reality is that until we fix this issue, we have to be able to take it on the chin that the abnormal world we're in from a point of view of training for Olympic Games, training for anything else, but in this case the Olympians, will have to remain until we can create a safer environment for the public. Because at the end of the day, humanity is more important with respect to all of us, and I love sport than any sport. The human, if you said to me, Neil or Cleana, having the Olympics is worth one person's life, I'd say it's not. I'd say scrap the Olympics for 4 years. It's not worth anybody's life.
I thought, Neil, this was a really interesting read and probably a reminder to us about racism in Ireland. There's a really good piece in it, or paragraph in it, when she says, race wasn't something I took much notice of in terms of prejudice when I was growing up, explains Moses, but I was naive. In Ireland, racism is hidden away just a little bit. It isn't as blatant as the UK or nearly as bad as it is in America, but in Ireland, people just try to present themselves as nice and hide those opinions away. They don't want to be thought of as bad people, which I think is... it's very interesting and powerful to hear her perspective on it, and maybe we have to acknowledge that. So in a country where we are, just because our heritage, we're very aware of where you are, who you are, where do you come from, all of that type of stuff. Just because our nationalism and our past, I guess. So we're just aware of it. And we're not a historically multicultural country. So I think that's something we in Ireland we have to acknowledge and deal with, is that, okay, there mightn't be any, as you used to say, the overt racism, but there's those sort of unconscious prejudice or assumptions, and we all have them. And if we pretend for a second that we don't, I think we're naive.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
OTB's Mount Rushmore, 32 counties, one county representative choosing their sporting Mount Rushmore.
So essentially your Rushmore is Darren Randolph, Katie Taylor, Laura Whitmore and me. That's it. Who else did you have in mind?
Join the debate across all our social channels at Off the Ball.
Tom, why are we even debating this? He won Wimbledon twice.
And catch the live decision making over the next few months on OTB AM, live every weekday at 7:30 AM on OTB Sports Radio.
OTB AM.
Yeah, loads of good stuff from the pay-per-view yesterday with Timmy and Cleany. You can get the full thing on the OTB Podcast Network. Just subscribe to OTB Highlights and you'll get it there. And loads of good stuff on the Podcast Network for you at the moment. You should also check out otbsports.com, our website, where you'll get that story that Gillian was talking there about the interview with Gina Ackley-Moses that Arthur D has done. There's also a great piece with Colin Boyd. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And a shirt that he got from Roy Keane back in the day. But you heard the sting being played there for OTB's Mount Rushmore. We've been waiting a long time for this, Eoin. It's time.
You cancelled your holidays, especially.
Just to make sure that you didn't... I didn't want you to go through this with Nathan here, right? There are certain experiences
Sports
in life...
broadcaster of the year, Nathan Murphy.
There are certain experiences in life that you want somebody to be gentle with you as you experience for the first time. And he would have just wound you up to the point where it would have been, difficult for you at the end. You would have lost it. I'm going to help you. Just to make sure that you don't blunder your way through. Because you basically, half an hour ago, for those people who've just tuned in, you announced, this is easy. I made my mind up a month ago. I have my 4. I'm not moving. And I think that maybe you need to reconsider that.
Well, it's easy today. It wasn't easy at the start. I walked a month ago so I could run today, basically. And the selections that I made a month ago are definitely correct, but they were definitely arrived at with a huge degree of complexity because there are just so many people to get into, which I'm sure we'll cover over the course of the morning.
Do you have no room in your mind now to be changed? Is your mind so closed entering into the next 2 hours of broadcasting that nothing can change you?
The thing is, what we've got coming up over the next hour, we've got Micheal O'Muircheartaigh coming up soon. We've got Kieran Donaghy later on. We've got Paul Galvin as well. All of them have published books. All of their opinions on Kerry football and Kerry sport in general are well known. I've absorbed a lot of that down through the years. There's a couple of Weeshy Fogarty books on the bookshelf behind me here. There are documentaries that have been done at length about all the Kerry legends. There is so much on the record already that allows you to actually make an informed choice in the year 2020, even if you were born yesterday. So thankfully, due to the literary genius of some of our writers and the broadcasting genius, the likes of Micheal O'Muircheartaigh, I have been able to make an informed decision. But I'm looking forward to Micheal coming on to inform everybody else about why my mountain is correct.
OK, well, we'll get to Micheal in one moment because he's ready and he's standing by. Here's what's coming up on the show for you. If you have just tuned in, it's 4 minutes past 8 here on OTBAM on Tuesday, the 2nd of June, as it is. Micheal O'Muircheartaigh is coming your way. Shane Hannon's going to join us in about 15 minutes' time to talk to us about the sports news over the last 24 hours or so. We'll bring in the sports pages, and then from 9 o'clock, it is pure unadulterated Kerryness. It's Mount Rushmore all the way. Kieran Donaghy is going to join Eoin to talk him through it, and then Paul Galvin will make one last pitch to make sure that we get the correct 4 people for Kerry's Mount Rushmore, and that was on OTB AM this morning. If you want to talk to us about anything we've already covered on the show, then do feel free to get in touch. 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. Micheal O'Muircheartaigh, good morning to you. Can I talk to?
And I'm looking out at the bluest sky I ever saw. Not even a fleck of a spot of any colour, but a lovely blue and the sun shining.
a nice bit of blue sky thinking for us all this morning is what we're looking for, Micheal, because we've given Eoin a very grave responsibility, and that's to pick the 4 greatest Kerry sports people of all time. And we feel like you might be able to help us to just shape some of his thoughts. When you were asked a little bit about this, where did your thoughts first go?
Well, I began to think about the whole thing, and Kerry is a great sporting county. Only 8 counties have won All-Irelands in football and hurling. Now, that makes them a unique bunch. They're in sport ever. But I began to look much further than Ireland after a while. I know that you could fill all the mountains in Kerry with great names, sporting names. A sporting name that came to my name, John Pius Mary Boland. Very few would have heard of him. He was a barrister born in Capel Street in Dublin, finished up going to Oxford and Cambridge and all those places, and he qualified as a barrister. To celebrate having passed his exams and everything, he went on a holiday to Greece, and it happened to be the opening of the Olympic Games, the revival of the Olympic Games in 1896. And one day he happened to see a notice, tennis competition on such a day, you're all welcome. He went along and he won the senior tennis singles championship there and got his medal for it. Sometime later that day he met some German person, he had maybe known him in college or something, and he said, there's doubles on tomorrow, could the two of us play? And they won the doubles as well. So he had 2 All-Ireland medals. But he was a Dublin man, but the link with Kerry is as follows. There was a by-election for a seat in the House of Commons, an MEP, in South Kerry. And they were debating as long as almost the political parties are now, who will we select? Somebody got an idea. How about that man from Dublin with 2 medals? Now, nobody knew him. He had never been to Kerry, but he was unanimously nominated and went to the House of Commons or wherever they go, the House of Lords. And he was there until 1918 when they were swept out of power. But he was there in Kerry, and his daughter represented. He was in Dáil later. So he was a sportsman. He had a great connection with Kerry. I thought the like of him should not be left out. Who could pick anyone connected with sport or adventure than Tom Cree? I thought of Tom Cree. And I remember one time Brian Mullins of Dublin meeting him, and straight away we didn't discuss football first at all. And he said, the greatest Kerry man that was ever born is Tom Cree. He said, I've read the book, I've studied it, I went here and there to find more information. And when Tom Cree, in one of his 3 exhibitions to Antarctica, one time when the great boat, the Endurance, surrounded by ice, getting stronger by the day, it was being crushed and crunched until eventually it went down. They had rescued their cameras, they had rescued their lifeboats, and here they were left. And while they were wondering, how will we get out of here, Tom Crean was seen playing football on the ice in Antarctica. So he has to be put in as a sports person, but a great person. There are so many people. You could talk about putting in Mary Jo Curran, 10 senior lady football All-Ireland and 10 All-Stars. Where could you get a match like that? Kerry won that hurling away back in 1891, and names like Skelper Quorn, he was in everyone's list always. Anyone, Nuala Moore, you know, she's a nice swimmer. She was a member of that relay team that went from the Bering Straits and Siberia and Russia right across to Alaska. Now, it was a relay team, swam it all, and she's been swimming everywhere. Great mention of her deeds in the Guinness Book of Records. We could go on and on forever, and we'd get lists, and we mightn't have a Rushmore mountain, but you'll get a mountain or someplace in Kerry where all those people from abroad who had links with Kerry, and of course Kerry footballers. You'd need a hell of a mountain to put on all the worthy players. So it's a wonderful idea, and I think it's worth pursuing. It can be set later where the centre will be, but I was delighted to hear about it.
Can I ask you about the team of the 80s? And poor Eoin is obviously, you know, it's folk memory in many respects. of which of those players was the best. And, you know, so TG Carr put on the Paddy O'Shea documentary last night. I think they were trying to lead the witness. I'm not going to lie. I think that there's no coincidence with the timing of the documentary, but it was a beautiful piece of filmmaking. And Paddy was such an iconic figure because obviously he ends the famine as well. But
he was an iconic figure before he ever put on a Kerry jersey. From the day he was born, I saw little shots of him maybe as a 4-year-old with the football trying to get past the young others. All his life he was bound up by football. But the 82 final between Kerry and Offaly, that was one of the finest All-Ireland finals that were ever played. And a lot of people go to All-Ireland finals, they don't go to see a particular team, they go to see a good match. They hope to see a good match. They'd be neutrals in a way. That was a great match. Both teams went out to play football. Now, Paddy was there that day. They had won 4 in a row, but the day they were going for 5 in a row, didn't work out. Offaly got a late goal. They won it. Their name is on the list, and there was a very, very good interview given by Mick Dwyer right after that. He was full of praise for Offaly, full of praise for the football that was produced during the game. So to be very hard to pick one. And at this moment, I wouldn't pick one. I had to deliberate on that. I think it's unfair to pick one person. They were a team in every sense of the word. Offaly were a brilliant team that day. So I don't know. There were so many of them there. They were always a team. And they had won their 4 in a row. 82 was a tough year for them. A big trip to America and New Zealand the autumn before that. Then the Munster final was a draw. They were in the league final. That was a draw. They had 2 extra games, but they were there. But in the end, it was Offaly got the goal. It was Offaly that took the Sam Maguire, and they're celebrating that ever since.
Of course.
And I have seen Kerry win 21 All-Ireland. They've won many since then, you know, and they come in waves, good teams, great respect. Anyone that wears the Kerry jersey in Croke Park on a big day, that's a big name forever. You could name several. You mentioned Kieran Donaghy there. I'm sure he'll never forget when he stepped out onto Croke Park for the first time playing for the Kerry seniors in the green and gold. It's a great day for the players. It's a great day for their people, for the followers in Kerry, parents and friends, the lot. Great occasions there.
Can I ask you, Micheal, about 2 players in particular from that team in the 80s as well? That I just want Eoin to get a sense of how spectacularly gifted they were. It's Pat Spillane and it's Jack O'Shea. I feel like both of their reputations, just with time, have become overshadowed by other things. But Jack O'Shea might have been the greatest footballer of all time.
Well, he might have been. He was that. Any player that played in 8 All-Ireland finals, played at midfield in all of them, won 7 of them. That's a great record. 3 under-21 All-Irelands, a minor All-Ireland and so on. And he went out to play football. You know, they all did. People love to see football being played, you know, not fouling or anything like that. He was definitely a great footballer, but if you move back a bit, you had great people. Mick O'Connell came from the same part of the country. South Kerry maybe didn't produce as many All-Ireland players as other areas of Kerry, but what they did produce, they were always top class, going way back to Eamon O'Neill in the early years and right down through the years. Pat Spillane then, he had ferocious, if you like, endurance. He could keep going forever. He was as determined as Paddy O'Shea was. And I often spoke to Pat, and I'll recall one time, he was dropped from the Kerry panel eventually. That happens to a lot of people. He had announced free from class at the time when he got word that he wasn't on the panel for the coming year. And he said to me, it was a shock. I didn't know how to react. I could tell them, go to hell, that I'm as good as anyone. I could say nothing, or I could train like hell and know in the back of my mind they'll be looking for me before the year is out. That's the way it turned out. He took it. He didn't complain. He went and did the extra bits of training himself, and he eventually got a call to come back. So he was a great warrior, you know, he's great stamina. I remember a move he made one time, going up along the sideline, somebody coming towards him to tackle him, threw the ball, let it in play, jumped outside the line, jumped over the camera and picked up the ball again and finished up scoring at the other end of the field. You know, he was a good player, but he wasn't the only good player. You know, they were a team. I always liked the concept of a team.
Yeah, they were unbelievable, Micheal, absolutely phenomenal. And the amount of tape you watch back, really, I'd say can't do it justice to obviously being there at the time. But even just to go back a little bit further, and it comes to some of the forefathers of Kerry football, who would be the names that come to your mind if you had to go back to, say, beyond the last century, or just within the last century, when it comes to the greats of Kerry GAA? Well,
the first All-Ireland final that I saw Kerry winning was when they beat Armagh in 1953. That was a good game as well, and lots of good players on the team, you know, strong team. That was the first All-Ireland played without Dan O'Keefe in goal since 1930. And the All-Ireland final up to then, it was Dan O'Keefe, his era was over. So it was a new team coming on the scene. They played very good football against Armagh. I remember my first glimpse of the game. I had to do a preview in Irish in the GPO from 3:15 until 3:25, and then came like hell on my bicycle, threw it against the wall into the long stand, only to see Malachy McAvoy, a great Armagh footballer, solo up the field and score a goal at the railway end of the ground. So I have great memories of that final as well. It was the first I saw. So they had great players as well. And the captain that time was Jas Murphy. He had played for Cork. He was a Garda down in Cork. He was a big man at cornerback, very strong, the biggest full back line I ever saw. Jas Murphy on the right, Roach in the centre, another big man, square shoulders, and Donny Murphy from Killarney. He was the third man in that line of strong, big men. All in those days, they used to keep their own positions. Get the ball in your own position, win it, and send it on. But we could speak forever about these all, you know, the number of them. We mentioned Nuala Moore and, you know, non-footballers and all that, but you'd put them all in the realms of sport. But 53 and then 55, to this day, I think the All-Ireland final between Kerry and Dublin in 55 was the most hyped final of all time, I think. And it was a great game again, and Kerry won, and Dublin nearly won. Dublin had to be given great credit. Dublin won in All-Ireland in 1958 with 12 players from the one club. It was Vincent's and Kevin Heffernan put Dublin on the map, and they struck up a great relationship with Kerry, which went back to 1923, but they had a great final in 55, and they had other ones as well.
Can I ask a question about Mick O'Dwyer as a footballer? Because I think it's part of his career and his talent that actually gets overlooked because he's such an important historical figure as a manager, one of the greatest managers of all time.
Mick O'Dwyer would never be overlooked. Now, the first mention I had of Mick O'Dwyer was an uncle, you know, he won Munster Junior with Kerry a way back, but he was a great judge of footballers. And before Mick hit the Kerry team at all senior level, my uncle, he was married to somebody from Valentia Island, Endemar. She stood for Mick O'Connell when he was baptised. But he saw a junior match the previous Sunday in Killarney, and he said, I saw a fellow playing that should be on the Kerry team. And the Kerry team meant the Kerry senior team. And he said, he's Micheal O'Dwyer. Now, I saw him then. He was a person, he played football. He wasn't as noticeable as others. That often happens to people with black hair, which he had at the time. He was left half back. He was perfect ball players. He was a good player to use it. He was a great taking frees. He won four All-Irelands, 2 as a defender, 2 as a forward. He had a terrific career as a footballer. And then as a manager, you know, everybody knows what he did. for Kerry. He was in Kildare. He was in Laois. To win a championship, a Leinster championship with Laois, the very first year he was there, he had this magic draw. He never had a lot of, manuals or anything like that. It was all coming out of the head, and he had a great belief in what he was called the wire-to-wire across the field in Killarney. Touch the wire on both ends. Who gets there first? And it was nearly always a defender, but he was a great manager. And there were lots of other good managers as well. You could speak about Kerry sport forever. You wouldn't, nor would the audience, tire of listening to this, that, and the other.
One thing I'm keen to ask you about, Micheal, is just about the place of Kerry and how much that almost adds to the legend around so many of these characters. Like you talk about Mick O'Dwyer and Mick O'Connell and Mick O'Connell's stories of rowing to the island and back, and how legendary those stories are, of Paddy O'Shea and running the roads around the great mountains of Dingle around there. So can you put that into the context a little bit in terms of how special these areas are and how much they create a mystique around these sporting legends?
Yeah, well, Kerry is it's a strange place. It's a unique place. Now, whether it's true or not, they have great confidence in themselves. And that confidence is a great thing. Hope is a great thing. Kerry always had those two features. It is said when Noah was going out in the ark and passing around, it was water everywhere, until he came to Kerry. And there was this big jutting up in beyond all the water. And lots of people collected there on the mountains of Kerry. Sliabh Luachra, they passed by, and then they were on the top, the Corán Pool, a big gang of people there. And Noah was passing in the ark, and he stopped and hailed and asked them would they come on board. It must be the captain that spoke. He said, it's only a shower, we're okay here. They are different in their ways of thinking. It's no harm to be different, to be thinking differently. And I think that this is a great idea. I don't know who came up with it, having this special place. Top of Corán Pool mightn't be a bad place to do carvings and all that, but it's an idea that should be pursued. But Kerry is a different place, How many people have gone to Kerry to find out, to go to Sliabh Luachra? But nobody ever found Sliabh Luachra. It does exist. I believe it exists, but I never saw it. It is there. It's maybe a state of mind. And I think one thing, neatly put one time by Brian McMahon, when he was talking about Kerry, he said, you cannot beat the kingdom Swede for horse or hound or man. The men would be the people that played football. The women would be involved in it now. Horses, there was a great show-jumping horse came from Listowel one time. He was the talk of the country for horse or hound or man. The hound would be the famous Spanish battleship. No doubt had ever won the Derby on 2 occasions. He did it 3 in a row. And I always say the dog was elected to Dáil and the owner took his place. That's the way with it. And I saw him run. First time he ran in Harold's Cross in Dublin, Spanish battleship owned by Chub Connor from Killorglin. He was a great character as well. But that dog went on to win 3 derbies. So Brian McMahon put it well, you cannot beat the kingdom Swede for horse or hound or man. And the story of the kingdom, there's a lot more years in it yet.
Micheal,
the Coon of Day, we'll see a lot of them.
Exactly. Well, I was just about to ask you, before we let you go, obviously the country has been through a period of lockdown. How have you been getting on?
Well, I'm cocooned, or as we say in Irish, I'm a quaharoo. Quahar is you're comfortable, cosy. That's quahar. And quaharoo then, the weather has been fine. I'm out in the middle of the country in County Meath, and it's going very well. What I really like, maybe for the first time ever, the people of Ireland have come together. It's not Kerry, it's not Cork, it's not Donegal. They're all thinking the same, they're helping each other, and the amount of people that are going out of their way to help people who need help, I like all those features, and I think it will change them. And I think that we have a brilliant generation of young people at the moment. Most of them, a very high percentage of the boys and girls, teenagers at the moment, finishing up with their senior education in primary school. I think they're a great generation, and that Ireland will be proud of those yet.
I hope you're dead right, Micheal. And look, it's been great to be able to tap into the wisdom that you've acquired over such a long period of time. I hope you feel like you're a national treasure at this stage, because we definitely feel like we're in the company of one this morning. So thanks a million. August Fain, that's Micheal O'Muircheartaigh giving us, and young Eoin, some guidance there, Eoin. So his picks: John Pius, Mary Boland, Tom Crean, Mary Jo Curran and Nuala Moore. Any of these tickling your fancy at the moment, Eoin?
Yeah, all of them would have been, Tom Crean is not somebody I'd considered obviously until last Friday when somebody tweeted it. And the candidate is fairly strong in Tom Crean. I think it's fair to say he's not going to make the mountain in the end. I think I was probably a little bit more boring with the sports that I chose. None of my Mount Rushmore will have made it to the South Pole, as far as I'm aware anyway. So Tom Crean was a good shout. Mary Jo Curran's going to come very close, if not on the mountain, and it's something that I'm sure Kieran will echo later on as well. If it's not for Cora Staunton, she's possibly the best women's footballer of all time. So when you've got somebody at the very top of their game like that, there's always a consideration. And then you'd Nuala and John Pius, Mary Boland as well, who, as Micheal alluded to, not very well known as a Kerry man, but his achievements are probably quite well documented in a historical sense.
I like the way that Kerry seem quite happy to take ex-Cork footballer, ex-Dub, to anoint them as their own. I didn't realise that this was part of your sporting culture, a little bit of magpieism.
Well, we'll see if they make the mountain. We'll see if that actually plays against them. Maybe I will be bitter to the very end, and Capel Street's John Pius, Mary Boland won't actually get a look in.
Or else you'll stick them on and steal it. Who knows? Right, great to hear from Micheal, obviously. We're going to be back with Shane Hannon in just a moment. But yesterday, we released this brilliant interview with Muhammad Ali's former manager, Gene Kilroy. The full piece is an hour. It debuted on OTB Sports Radio. It's available in our Highlights podcast stream and also on our YouTube channel. Have a quick look.
Ali said to Casamata, how do I fight this guy? He said, you must throw your punches with bad intentions. He said, your first punch, you must hit him so hard. And I said, well, look at Cuss. Look what Foreman did to Norton. Look what he did to Fraser. That's not Ali. So Ali said, I know what I'm doing. And I went in the dressing room when they were taping Foreman's hands. Dick Sadler was there, Archie Moore. I felt death in the air. So I go back to Ali's dressing room. He said, what's he saying? I said, he's talking about putting your kids in an orphanage. Oh, I can't wait to get him. And if you watch the fight, you'll see George coming out like this, and Ali hits him, boom. And the lights went out. And then Ali abused him. George was knocked guys down, step on him to get to the neutral corner. He couldn't do that with Ali. Ali had no fear. Ali had no fear.
That's Muhammad Ali's business manager, Gene Kilroy, speaking with Shane Hannon in depth. Shane, good morning to you. How you doing?
Morning, lads. Keeping well now. Thanks.
You look like you were enjoying yourself there.
Jesus, yeah. Enjoying myself there. Enjoying myself beforehand with Micheal O'Muircheartaigh as well. A couple of guys who know how to tell stories. But yeah, Gene's a fascinating guy. I mean, to get the insight, I just read Jonathan Igg's book on Ali, and kind of the overarching idea I had got from the Rumble in the Jungle was that, Ali was 32 years of age, Foreman is 25, and the reigning heavyweight champion, and that Ali indeed did have fear of George Foreman. And that was what was portrayed in the book anyway. But Gene fairly clearly cleared that up. So his opinion was that no, Ali had no fear whatsoever of George Foreman, and Gene has a right to an opinion on this because he, of course, was Ali's man in Foreman's dressing room for the loving process. So quite an insight. And if you watch the video back of the Rumble in the Jungle, Gene is the first man into the ring afterwards to hug his boy Ali. So.
Just a little bit of problem there with Shane's line. Yeah, look, I think this is a good opportunity for us all to spend some time with those fights and to look back on them and actually luxuriate in the quality of them, because football is coming back, sport is coming back. I think we have re-established connection there with you, Shane, yeah?
Yeah, should be here. No, I was just saying he's such an extraordinary man. I mean, in his mid-80s now, living in Vegas, so quite an extraordinary life. He used to work with the Philadelphia Eagles, Gene Kilroy, as well, and spent time as an executive host for a lot of the top casinos, including the MGM Grand. So even if you ignore the fact that he was Muhammad Ali's manager for so many years, he's had an extraordinary life.
And some stories to tell, I'm sure, about what went on in those rooms. Come here, what is actually happening in the world of sport?
Yeah, we'll kick off with the news that's kind of permeated the world over the last week or so. Liverpool players have taken the knee in a message of support following the killing of African-American George Floyd at the hands of a white police officer in Minneapolis. 29 Reds players gathered in the centre circle during training at Anfield yesterday. Manchester United pair Paul Pogba and Marcus Rashford have added their voices to the worldwide protests against racism. Six-time Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton, meanwhile, has been critical of the slow response of his fellow drivers to speak out, saying, "I see those of you who are staying silent." And meanwhile, it's been mentioned already this morning, but Irish athlete Gina Akpe-Moses says there is a level of hidden racism here in Ireland. Born in Lagos in Nigeria, Gina was raised in Dundalk and now lives in London. She spoke with our own Arthur O'Dea over the weekend. That full interview, as we've said, is on otbsports.com. Well worth getting that article for you this morning. The Premier League's top referees are hoping to take charge of a series of friendly matches over the next 2 weeks to help them return to competitive action. Talks are underway on how they could officiate the games at biosecure training facilities. The top flight is, of course, due to return on the 17th of June. Meanwhile, some decent news for Manchester United fans over the weekend as well. From a playing perspective, Nigerian forward Odion Ighalo has extended his loan deal until January of next year. He joined on loan from Chinese Super League club Shanghai Shenhua at the beginning of this year and has scored a few goals in the games he has started thus far. Meanwhile, Queen's Park Rangers have said they are appalled by plans to restart the English Championship season on June 20th. The London club's players have yet to return to full contact training. Their chief executive Lee Hoyce says there has been absolutely no consultation with individual clubs, nor with the Championship Doctors working group by the divisional representatives or anyone else in the Football League regarding the matter. An FAI council member, Nixon Morton, has complained to FIFA and UEFA over areas under the current governance of the association. Morton is the schools representative on the council. He's written to the world and European bodies to raise issues around the expansion of independent directors on the FAI board from 4 to 6 and the mandatory retirement of council members that have served for 10 years. To rugby news this morning, lads, the IRFU have requested that their 217 clubs create roles for COVID-19 safety and compliance officers on a voluntary basis. Physical contact sports will be allowed to permit full contact training from August 10th under the current government roadmap. Claire Williams admits the poor performance on track in recent seasons has prompted Williams to look for further investment. They've finished last in the Formula One Constructors' Championship for the past 2 years, where they have also lost their title sponsor. Despite those issues, Williams insists the future of the F1 team is not in jeopardy. Following a successful meeting at Newcastle yesterday, horse racing continues its return today, both there and indeed at Kempton Park. Zodiacos wrote his name into the record books with a win yesterday in the first race in Britain since the sport's last event on March the 17th. Legendary jockey Frankie Dettori is amongst the riders that go later as he teams up with Galsworthy for trainer John Gosden. And finally, some snooker back as well indeed, lads. The Championship League was the first sports event in the UK to be shown free to air since the easing of restrictions, with an on-site hotel in Milton Keynes allowing players to isolate before play. World champion Judd Trump, one of those in action yesterday. He had to isolate for 18 hours after being given a COVID-19 test at 4 o'clock on Sunday. With Trump, along with the tournament's 7 other players and 35 staff working at the venue, returning a negative result. Play began yesterday and continues indeed today.
All right, Shane, good stuff. Thanks very much for that. We'll get to your comments rolling in. Somebody suggesting Moss Keane for Mount Rushmore. Haven't heard his name mentioned once. Owen.
Yeah, we should have asked Micheal about that, actually, about that game that you may have heard about where Munster beat the All Blacks. Moss Keane was a part of that. Little known tale there from the annals of Irish sport, which I can bring people up to speed on whenever they like.
Mick Galway, obviously, an All-Ireland winner and multiple tens of, was he 50 caps, 60 caps? About that for Ireland? Maybe a bit less. Mm-hmm. But, you know, no hint of that. You hate rugby, is that it? Is that what's going on here? Even though you're now officially a rugby man, you've kind of regressed to your pre-Dublin era Kerryness. Is that what's going on?
Well, I'm going to be making cases for both of these people. Okay. And it will happen before the day is out. They're two absolute legends, no question.
From Bazzaroni, that is. Keep the comments and ideas rolling in. 087 180 180 is the WhatsApp number, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube channel. Time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
Okay, so OTBsports.com this morning, the other face of Roy Keane is Colin Buig's story about A Roy Keane jersey that hangs proudly in his house. It was replacing a Roy Keane jersey that he was wearing when he had an accident on holidays in Spain. A pretty horrific accident that nearly cost him his life. Obviously, he lived to tell the tale, and he's lived to tell the tale brilliantly on otbsports.com, which is the website this morning. Also there is that piece that we've been talking about where Gina Akpi-Moses has spoken with Arthur O'Dea. Why is there a black girl on the Irish team is the title for that. This has got a lot of response over the weekend, and I think with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, it would be important for us to reflect on ourselves as a country and how well we treat minorities in this country, and not very well is the answer. Obviously, I think if we're all being truthful about that. So that's on the website at the moment. Liverpool squad show solidarity with George Floyd on Anfield pitch, and Frankie Dettori will ride for Aidan O'Brien in the 2000 Guineas. Lewis Hamilton also coming out saying that the Formula 1 response to the George Floyd killing has been conspicuous by its absence.
The Irish Independent this morning leads with that FAI story that Shane mentioned a moment ago. Titanic battle for soul of football, reads the headline. FAI Council member Morton warns UEFA and FIFA that outside forces are taking over. So interesting stuff in this. As Shane mentioned, he's warned that a titanic battle for the heart and soul of football in our own country is imminent, because the terms of the interim FAI board's rescue deal with the government will result in a loss of sovereignty that is unique amongst the 211 FIFA nations. Also on the back page of the Irish Independent, you've got a picture there of runners and hiders, eyes on the prize at Newcastle. That is Kerry native and England's reigning champion jockey Oisin Murphy preparing to canter his mount down to the start at Newcastle yesterday. And the other story here, written by Cian Tracy, clubs begin search for volunteer COVID-19 officers as IRFU published summary roadmap. So Irish rugby clubs up and down the country have begun their search for COVID-19 safety officers to oversee public health measures in the club, as well as a COVID-19 compliance officer to monitor day-to-day compliance with protocols across all teams. So the wheels very much in motion for return to playing rugby at the moment.
The Irish Times this morning, FAI Council member raises concerns about governance of organisation. That's the letter that Nixon Morton has written to FIFA and UEFA about concerns about potential outside controls. They're also talking about an increase in membership for adapting golf clubs and Kick It Out, urging Premier League players to take a knee. So it's going to be interesting to see just how these protests spread around the world.
The Irish Examiner this morning leads with Davy Fitzgerald's latest comments about GAA clubs having their gates closed. John Fogarty writes, open GAA pitches to help people's mental health, pleads Fitzgerald. He does not believe the GAA authorities are giving enough consideration to the mental health of its members by keeping pitches closed. And this seems to be a debate that's intensifying as the weeks go by. You've got that FAI story there as well. Board set to discuss that critical letter sent by council member Morton. Knockout might help Cork end All-Ireland famine, says McGrath. So this is Shawnee McGrath, who reckons a knockout championship could add to Cork's chances of landing an All-Ireland hurling title later this year. You might be able to say the same for everybody in Munster. Perhaps the Munster Championship would be less of a burden on those coming through that province. Blacklight, that being said, you do have the last two All-Ireland winners coming from Munster, so perhaps that point of the round robin actually not being advantageous to them maybe doesn't actually make that much sense. And Black Lives Matter, Black culture matter, black communities matter, we matter. This is Marcus Rashford amongst the quotes there in that piece on the Irish Examiner.
The London Times for you this morning, and they have Hamilton called out F1 over racism. So that's Lewis Hamilton's Instagram posts, and eventually 9 of Hamilton's 19 fellow F1 drivers had added their support to his stance yesterday, including 3 younger drivers, Charles Leclerc, George Russell and Alex Albon, who admitted they'd been unsure how to articulate their feelings on the subject. Racing's big return hit by horse death. So racing yesterday became the first major sport to take place in Britain since the coronavirus outbreak in March, but obviously hit by the death of a horse over the course of it.
The Irish Daily Mail this morning leads with that photograph there of Liverpool stars joining race protest. The main story, club split on new rules. Plans to bring in multi-ball system, increase subs to 5 and re-register players leads to dissent in Premier League ranks. So the league facing dissent from several clubs over a number of these proposed changes. Sportsmail has learned that plans to increase the number of subs from 3 to 5 to allow clubs to re-register players not named in their squad in January and to introduce a multi-ball system all have detractors. And there's also going to be unhappiness, they write, at some clubs about the Premier League's unwillingness to reconsider the use of VAR Of course, VAR would be the cockroach that comes crawling out from beneath the fridge at the end of COVID-19 when it comes to football debates. But there is some unwillingness to reconsider the use of VAR, which FIFA ruled last month could be abandoned for the rest of the campaign. So get ready for more VAR chat next month when football comes back. And FAI Council member blasts FAI, writes Philip Quinn.
And the Irish Sun, back page there is a recipe for disaster. Ferdinand injury fears over restart plan. Les Ferdinand fears the bombshell plan to restart the championship in just 18 days poses a bigger risk to players than COVID-19. Figures that they won't be ready physically for it. Book on track. Bookies reported a bumper turnover as racing got back on track at Newcastle yesterday. United 10 million to extend Iggy Stop. There you go, you get it, Iggy Stop. Manchester United are forking out 10 million to extend Odi Nagalo's stay until the end of January. It's a lot of money, but I suppose if he's working for them, and he seems to be, then it's kind of irrelevant. If you're Man United, you can afford it. And top flight travel all up in air. Premier League clubs are still in the dark about comeback procedures just 15 days before the return of top flight football. Some teams fear their players could be forced into 12-hour road trips to maintain social distancing. And the UK government guidelines published on Saturday have only added to the travel confusion. A lot of, I don't know, did you see that, Owen? A lot of concern that essentially the British government had banned sex over the course of the weekend, accidentally, maybe on purpose, who knows?
They accidentally banned it. I actually missed this. Is this like the opposite of the time the Irish government accidentally legalised was it just ecstasy or was it all drugs? It was a good range.
It was a good range, okay, fair enough. Because I remember, didn't Blind Boy go on Tom Dunn that night and take yokes? Or was it something
must listen
else?
back.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happened. So essentially it was like gatherings of people were not going to be allowed. Essentially you couldn't go around to somewhere and have sex. And it was like, well, obviously the family gatherings are going to preclude that from happening. And there was a lot of back and forth, pardon the pun, about this on social media over the course of the last 36 hours or so. I'm surprised you missed it.
God, the United States really picked the wrong weekends to grab the international headlines, and what we could have been talking about this morning at 7:30 could have been something far more important. Back page of the Irish Daily Star this morning is cabin fever. Premier League stars could be made to change in prefab huts as part of measures. FAI face another headache. This is the latest in the FAI leadership and the letter that's been written. Davy says county return safer. Wexford hurling boss Davy Fitzgerald thinks inter-county games should be played before club games in 2020, and signs are good for racing after its return in Newcastle yesterday.
He's not the first person just recently to say that, Davy Fitz. What do you think of it?
It made relative sense at the start that the idea of bringing club action back before inter-county action was a bit fanciful. It makes sense that you would want that to happen, but there's just a multitude of them. It's exponentially larger, the number of players and clubs that would be involved. There's less facilities that tend to be available to club players, less resources. It would be less safe, you would have thought. A smaller pool of people would be more safe. But the thing is, they're both amateur players, and if you're going to play something in a compact fashion and try and get the groundswell of people on your side and playing club games, probably makes more sense. But I don't know, like maybe you start at the top and you work your way down, and maybe starting inter-county games actually makes more sense there. But John Horan has been pretty clear on this. The club is going to come first.
I have no mirror this morning. If we've got a PDF, we can stick that up. If we don't, we can move on. Oh, there you go. Unity of strength. Sancho's message sparked wave of support for George Floyd protests. The new place for football, Prem starts to change in porta cabins, and the new face of racing with masks as well.
The Guardian this morning leads with blueprint for change. Women's game must cast off the shackles of the FA to thrive after this crisis. This is obviously a lot going on with the WSL in the UK at the moment. A photograph there of Manchester City fans at the Etihad Stadium for their game against Arsenal in February. That is the Guardian this morning. Also, a couple of other stories at the inside. Back on the bays, the new normal hits Milton Keynes, and RFL's £1 million Ashes up in flames after series is cancelled.
The Telegraph back page there is a picture from the racing yesterday at Newcastle. Horse death casts shadow over racing's big return. How do United fit Pogba and Fernandes into the same team? Maybe they don't. And clubs fury at championship start dates. So the clubs think that it's coming back too soon. 3 Charlton players are refusing to play because they're out of contract. That's the Liverpool players taking a knee yesterday. Liverpool and Rashford lead the support for Floyd protests. People are hurting, Black Lives and culture matter. That's the Marcus Rashford comment. And no rerun can beat the thrill and anticipation of not knowing the outcome. Yeah, a lot of these games that are going to come thick and fast, a lot of people aren't going to be that interested in many of them because a lot of them won't be very good games. There's a lot of... It's funny, the situation that we're in now where we're watching back some of the best games from previous eras, and I know there's been some criticism of the standard of play in those games, but now we see every game. If you want to, you can literally watch any Premier League match that you want, and sometimes the standard of them is overwhelmed by the fact that it's available. Too much of anything is too much of something.
Yeah, like there's 2 things here, and maybe in a second, if we have time, I would like to come to the defence of classic games because they've actually got a bit of a battering over recent weeks. Like I see Eamon Sweeney was destroying it into Sunday Independent at the weekend, and I can see the point largely, but we'll come back to that in a sec. But just on the Premier League thing, I hear what you're saying, and I can see how the percentage of games being watched by people with a decent interest in the Premier League will just dwindle as time goes by. Even when it comes to the main prize in the Premier League, that is the least interesting thing. We want to be watching relegation-threatened teams. If Manchester City's ban gets upheld, we want to be...
Yeah. Well, there still will be enough prize money at stake, but like, you have to explain that to the manager, and then the players have to really care about finishing 13th as opposed to 17th. Okay, 17th is not good, but 15th.
No, 17th is okay. 17th is good.
Fair point. Yeah, I mean, you'd be sweating it a little bit.
A small bit, but yeah, like Liverpool winning the Premier League, nobody is watching that. Nobody's watching Liverpool when we come back with the sense of the unexpected. It is a procession. We will watch the final game, and we would like to see how they react because it's going to be weird when they win the Premier League in front of an empty stadium.
Unless they've been eating like banana bread for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like a few of us have. You know, and they're out of condition somewhat. That would be interesting. You know.
Imagine if that happened. Like, imagine if Liverpool bottled the Premier League from here. It would actually be the most insane thing that happened in 2020, which is actually saying quite something. It would be beyond funny at this point. Like, but it's obviously not going to happen. And like, I'd be kind of hopeful for like a decent bit of excitement when it comes to the top 4 under relegation. That crazy things can happen when games are compressed together. It'll feel like World Cup afternoons when you have like 4 or 5 games on. And you know, I've got no issue with that, and I'm all for having everything available to people, and then them making their own choice on whether or not they want to watch it. And everything is going to be available for Premier League fans over the next couple of weeks. But just on the classic game point, just because it sparked something in me over the course of the weekend, where I was like, they have got a bit of a bashing, haven't they? Or is it just me?
No, no. It's been out there. All these games are rubbish. Like, yeah, really, they're not. I mean, they really aren't. Like,
but it's that's not so much my angle. My angle on it is the idea of classic games as a whole, about the idea of watching back games that you know the result in. And I can see the point that it takes away something when you don't have suspense, that sport is pointless without that suspense, when you do know who is going to win the game or what the result is going to be. But I'm not sure would I go along with the fact that it is totally pointless without that. I think there is still a huge value in watching back old games. Like, if we are going to hold sport to such a high standard that it is akin to art, then it should be immune to the idea of spoilers or knowing what the outcome is going to be or knowing who is going to score the winning goal. We can actually refer to sport as an art form, which we sometimes do. If that is not hyperbole, then we should be able to watch back these games, know the result, and still marvel at what is happening. And especially for the last 2 weeks when we've done our classic game clubs and stuff, I've got so much enjoyment from watching the Istanbul final last week, from watching Juventus against Manchester United in full for the first time. Like, I watched it in full at the first time. Not a single iota of recollection from it. We've seen all these parts in different clips down through the years, but actually watching these things back in full, getting to appreciate just how good Zinedine Zidane was in the late 90s, getting to appreciate just how good Roy Keane was in the late 90s. This is what sport is about appreciating individual brilliance at times, and to say, these don't matter because we know that Manchester United are going to win the treble that year, is actually a ridiculous argument if you are a fan of sport. Now, if you don't like sport and you say, well, it's all about who wins at the end of the day, then fair enough, you're onto something. But for me, sport means a hell of a lot more than just who wins at the end.
Yeah, and look, I actually, you benefit from watching it again, because when all you're interested in is the suspense and drama of what the outcome is going to be, you don't pick up on how a team actually asserted itself, particularly over a long period of time. Did you, for example, before The Last Dance, did you rate Michael Jordan as highly as you rated LeBron James?
It's a good point. Like, I always thought LeBron was the GOAT because I think people get better and better over time. But if you are being relative, then no, it definitely hammers home that fact that Michael Jordan is the GOAT.
And essentially, that was just a montage of games where it was an explainer about he did this, he did this, he did this, and 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 he did this again and again and again and again, six times in big playoffs. And even to get to the playoffs, sometimes he had to do it in unbelievable circumstances. So that was essentially a glorified 10-part classic game club. And I was like, okay, actually, you know what? This is important because it's history. This isn't just sitting down and mindlessly watching a game again. It's actually watching it from the vantage point of today, where you get to go and piece things back and see the evolution of styles of play. And I think I thought it was pretty interesting. So.
And there is also an element of agony that goes with this. You may not have suspense, but like the first classic game club we did back in January was Kerry against Dublin in 2013. That was painful. It's still painful. If you are a supporter of one of the teams and you end up watching your team lose again and again and again, it is a form of self-torture. So it isn't without its emotion.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to say that. I've only got one newspaper this morning left. It's the Irish News. A whole new game. That's jockeys in using social distancing measures in the parade ring at Newcastle yesterday. And Team Ulster idea a non-runner, says Antrim star McManus. So this is Neil McManus, the Antrim hurler, who says, what would happen if Antrim, if 9 or 10 of the lads are away playing for Team Ulster? It would genuinely scare me. So probably makes sense for all of the other counties in Ulster to have this team, but Antrim may have designs in the future of them being their own independent powerhouse once again.
Well, I mean, prove it. That's the thing. Like, you've had 4 decades of farting around to get your house in order and you haven't managed to do it. So the time to prove that was over the last period of time when you are on your own, but actually have not managed somehow to mobilise the resources of the giant population that you have and the tradition of hurling that you have. So I think, like, unless absolutely radical measures are taken to protect and invest in hurling in Antrim and in the 6 counties, and like I can't see Monaghan contributing. I can't see, maybe some Donegal hurlers might be interested. And I don't know if it's a full 9 counties province or if it is actually, are we talking about, obviously you can't have a 6 counties qualification because that would be recognising partition, which you couldn't do.
Yeah, that would be the biggest irony in the history of the GAA, where to be a 6 counties team, really.
Something you'd suggest, Eoin.
Where had we, like, obviously the Antrim story kind of comes up time and time again. It seemed that it wasn't in an amazingly good place even before this crisis, but I wonder, is this the sort of never failed to make use of a crisis sort of situation where the county is suffering and Antrim with its resources can now turn something into a bit of a positive after all of this? Like, it just always seemed like the biggest untapped market in the GAA, especially when it just comes to pure success.
Yeah. Look, I definitely feel like there's the bones of a good hurling team there, and I think that if you were, for example, to put combined schools teams in the national schools competitions, then all of a sudden those players would have some experience. They did this essentially with Dublin, and then over a period of time, you break up that school into that school's regional side into smaller regional school sides, but it takes massive investment and it takes massive commitment from loads and loads of people, and at the moment, I don't know if that leadership exists, and you can kind of see the difficulties that they've had around the stadium issue in Belfast. So, like, I don't know, we should definitely do something about this over the next while, because I think it's certainly, it's a bit of an open scab at the moment, the way that hurling has deteriorated so quickly, in Antrim in particular.
Yeah, it is. You would definitely can't make a case against it not being a bad thing for everybody involved, really. And it's just almost the scenes at Casement Park just hammered this thing home. it really is just like salt in the wound of what this is, seeing this actual resource just lying idle at the moment, weeds growing literally on the pitch where there should be great teams playing. It's sad to see, and I don't know, hopefully at the end of this, things will start moving in the right direction for everybody involved there.
I can do the Herald for you to wrap this one up now. Outside forces will own the FAI. This is the letter that has been sent to UEFA and FIFA by a member of the FAI's senior council. A loss of sovereignty that will be unique among the 211 FIFA nations, which is, shows good knowledge of what's going on in the other 210 FIFA nations. Nixon Morton, a member of the FAI Schools National Executive, a number of my senior council colleagues and other members across football are very concerned by what is happening to the game in Ireland under the stewardship of the existing interim board. Outside forces now have ownership of the game. This is very interesting. I mean, I love when people complain about it. Oh, I've talked to loads of other people about this, and they feel the same as me. They're just not saying it. I'm like, well, let's see it from them. Let's have them also. If you're the ringleader, then I'm sure you've got agreement for them to put their names to it too. That's not to say there aren't issues with the existing interim board. I'm sure there are, and you can be sure that there are all sorts of heaves. And as you said earlier on about never letting a good crisis go to waste, there are undoubtedly forces within the FAI who see this as a big opportunity to seize power, and you obviously want to keep an eye on what's going on there, and so we will over the next while as well. I just want to tell you, tomorrow morning on OTB AM, Floyd Landis is going to join us to look back at the second episode of the Lance Armstrong documentary. It wrapped up in the States over the course of the weekend, and the second episode is an hour and 40 minutes. Again, it's quite whistle stop. There's there's loads of little nuggets in it, but there's large elements of it that you're left feeling a little bit queasy about a lack of detail, or even a lack of an up-to-date perspective from people who would be super critical of Lance. He does most of the job himself. I think that's kind of the point here, is that they've allowed Lance to essentially tell his own story, and you are then left to make up your mind about whether or not you think he is a credible witness after all these years of being a literally incredible witness, where he is a self-confessed liar, and the scale of the lie and the ability to tell those lies. I'm not going to give any of the spoilers away before people actually see this, because it's on BT tonight. But the opening question is like, do you feel you want to be relevant again, or is it like, are you doing all this to be relevant? And there's a long pause, and he just says, I am relevant. I was like, okay, right. And look, here's the thing. Maybe he is. Maybe he is. We were watching it last night, and like, has he found God? My wife asked. I was like, no, but Jesus, that's a great idea. If Lance Armstrong found God, I guarantee you, he would be electable.
It's the one missing link. Like, I mean, nothing could be too absurd in terms of trying to suggest anybody could become presidential. But like, it is interesting when you say that. Like, we were obviously quite harsh on the documentary last week, because, as you say, it does feel kind of whistle stop. We knew 95% of the details we were getting shown, which is always a little bit dissatisfying. But as you say, like, when you've got that much Lance, he's going to David Brent himself at some point, where he is going to say something that makes him look ridiculous, or reminds you of why he is such kind of an unpalatable character in world sport.
Yeah, and there's plenty of that, so enjoy it if you haven't seen it. But this week we're releasing some of the best pieces from the OTB Gold archives around the Lance Armstrong story right now in the OTB Podcast Network. You'll find some great stuff. An Emma O'Reilly interview. She features in the second episode. Betsy Andreu. We had Betsy on the following week when Emma was in talking about her book. We Tyler Hamilton in studio, as well as the piece we did last week on OTB AM, and David Walsh of the Sunday Times talking about Team Sky in December 2016. We'll be posting more during the week too, into highlights from Off the Ball, and you'll also find these over on Off the Ball on otbsports.com/podcasts. Jean Kilroy Muhammad Ali interview, Sunday paper review, World Cup recap. They were looking back at 1994, and great GAA rivalries, Limerick against Clare, which is where we're turning now, as this week on the Saturday panel, John Duggan caught up with James O'Connor of Clare and Limerick's Joe Quaid to look back on their great rivalry of the 1990s. Have a quick look.
In those matches, guys, whether you win or lose, this is what amateur sport And I do think the intensity's gone out of it. I do think we see the intensity, say, towards a semi-final or a final of the All-Ireland series. But the knockout, while I think it's wrong and it's not right for the professional amateur era, as I would call it, of course players are amateurs now, but they're not paid. But with the amount of work they're putting in, they need more than one match a year. But back then, there was something special about that.
Well, James, I think you would agree with me. Like, would we have come back in '96 against Clare if we knew there was another day out? Like, it was do or die. You were going home. I remember 15 minutes left in that match. My uncle was doing stewarding behind the goals. We looked like we were done and dusted, and he brought me out a ball to puck out, and I pucked it out, and I went back to him, and I said, "I'd say we're done." And he said, "It looks like it." I was kind of looking up at the stand going, well, I go on my holidays this year. Do you know, and that's the way it was. It was that stark. If you were beaten first game of the year or last game of the year, whenever you were beaten, you were gone. And I don't know, would the drive be there to come back and put everything, absolutely everything on the line to get back to winning that match. The same in the final in '96 against Tip, we were down 10 points at halftime. Like, I remember Kieran coming into the dressing room, and fellas were going to the toilet and sitting down. He got everyone to stand up straight after going in and give an unbelievable speech. Let's get back out there. Like, are we going to bow to the championship like this? And I know Tip people said, some of the players, that we were gone back out after 5 or 6 minutes. And they said it was like facing into Bale and Blood. It was an ambush. They came out in the second half. Like, they could feel it in the ground, the tension. When they came out, we were there for probably 10 minutes waiting for them. Do you know, would that happen nowadays? No. But at the same time, I do agree that the round robin, especially last year, I thought it worked. I thought they got it right. The matches that were played were superb. It's given, I suppose, players a lot more opportunity. Like, you know, James, if you had a bad day in the championship in your first outing, you mightn't play again that year.
And Joe, and even the rivalry. I mean, we obviously had you guys, 93, 94, 95, 96, but I didn't play Limerick in the championship again after that in my career, and I played until 2000 and 2004. I mean, it was that's one of the things that I suppose was down to the vagaries of the draw. That as it moved on, kind of, we just didn't meet Limerick, and suddenly Tip and us, we seemed to be drawing the championship every year together, and that maybe became I suppose for us the biggest rivalry, purely because we weren't meeting Limerick in the championship, and that's been something that's been great to see. You know, even I suppose going back to 2018 when you won it or whatever. I mean, coming out to Ennis and that was arguably the winning of that Ireland for Limerick that year. You know, the fact that you came to Ennis or whatever, and Clare obviously were up for it big time, and you'd come back from I suppose the epic performance in Cork, 14 men getting the draw, and played really well, and I suppose again it was Ennis was electric that day. Great crowd, great buzz, big crowd at Limerick from early in the day, and that's what you want to see in the championship.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Looking for a football show with a bit of a twist?
So I know the likes of Griezmann's big into his fashion.
You wanted a lot. One question he actually asked me was, could he make his studs light up when he runs?
Team 33, the football magazine show for the football purists.
Yeah, the Nike Mercurials from 1998. If you just show that boot to an entire generation of people, and they just get instantly nostalgic and remember everything from that era.
The very best interviews with the cult heroes of the past, and a look at the cultural side of football. Team 33, live at 9 p.m. every Friday on OTB Sports Radio.
OTB AM.
Look up on Patrick's Hill. Who would you take down? Who would you take down?
OTB AM's Mount Rushmore.
Kerry version. Eoin, how are you?
I'm suddenly nervous.
Good. You should be.
Like, it's just really hit me bang right in the stomach what this means. The pressure that Micheal has inadvertently put me under has now just manifested itself in all of my senses. So it's real now. I'm suddenly I feel like I've arrived in a cold sweat almost.
Like Paddy's right-hand leads to Dinny Allen.
Well, exactly. A nice smack right in the jaw is how this has arrived this morning.
How do you think TG Carr arrived at the decision to play out the Paddy documentary last night? What happened there, Eoin?
Well, it's a great question. You said it was some sort of leading of the witness, which it may well have been. I will reiterate for people just joining us that I selected my mountain 3 weeks ago, and I have stuck with the same mountain. Thankfully, says you, Kieran Donaghy is with us, and he will be able to actually change one of my suggestions. But I've gone to bed soundly for the last 3 weeks, knowing that I've made the right call. If I don't sleep sound tonight, I guess I've only got myself to blame.
Okay, I should just exactly outline what's going to happen for new people to the Mount Rushmore situation. We ask you to pick 4 people. Kieran gets to edit that and fix it. He can put one person in, take one off. And we also, just before we finalise the mountain, have a final pitch. Paul Galvin's going to do that final pitch for us today. We've already sought some information from Micheal O'Muircheartaigh to give us some names from the past and some names that I think are probably very much in the shout for it. Kieran Donaghy is with us this morning. Kieran, good morning to you.
Morning, boys. How are you?
Are you nervous?
Yeah, I've sweaty palms for whatever reason, so I guess I am.
You were refusing to pick your own 4, is that right? You're like just going to sit there, like, you know, the Trashy Fraggle Rock and go, I'm going to be the boss here, Eoin.
No, I picked 4.
You did pick 4? Okay.
I did pick 4, yeah. Tommy was kind of putting it up to me, and I was kind of like, okay, I'll pick 4. So yeah, but like it's hard. It's no joke to try and get it, you know, to try and narrow it down. Like trying to pick between some of the Kerry forwards we've had down the years. It's like I don't know what it's trying to compare. But I have my own idea on what to do about that. But yeah, a lot of great people missed out and close, and for various reasons. But I went just with kind of iconic status. Really, is the way I put it in, and that's the best way I could try and pick it down here.
Yeah, and did you weight it more heavily towards your own era, so that you know that in your own WhatsApp groups you're going to be forgiven? For example, you're not in a WhatsApp group, I suspect, with Mick O'Connell and Mick O'Dwyer. You're not going to get any grief from them, but you might get some grief from other people.
I don't know if I'll get grief. I don't know if I think our group were very much aware of what went before us. So there's none of my group on it anyway. So they're going to have to. I'll have to take it on the chin off one of them maybe after a few pints when we're able to get back out to the pubs. Yeah, no, they could be pissed off at me, but I think they know what went before us as well, and. Trying to pick between them anyway was too hard, to be honest with you.
Okay, fair enough. Eoin, what was in your mind when it came to this? Because, like, I know you grew up revering, say, Seamus Moynihan, for example. How did you weight the history of Kerry football? It is all football, am I right in saying that? You've for your 4, you're going all football, is that right?
It is. It's going to be all football come the end. I'll explain that in a little while why I arrived at that decision. But yeah, 4 footballers is what I'm ending up with.
And what was your criteria? How did you make it work in your own head?
Sporting success was a prerequisite rather than being the single thing that you measure this by. So I'm not going onto Wikipedia, All Ireland medals, sort by most, and picking 4 from the golden age. That's not what I'm doing. So it's prerequisite, but it's not the only judging thing that I've used. Adoration from the people of Kerry is the second thing, which is a very nebulous thing, but it's a real thing. Some Kerry legends are more revered in Kerry than others for certain reasons, and I'm talking just about within Gaelic football. And a question I've asked myself for each and every pick is, will this person be remembered in 100 years? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you're in with a shout. Some people will be remembered in 200 years, and I dare say it'll be well beyond a century before the 4 people I've selected will ever be forgotten in the county of Kerry.
A couple of quick comments. Brian Flanagan from the Star, how you doing, Brian? He was suggesting Jim Cullerty, 3 Cheltenham Gold Cups as a jockey and 1 as a trainer and a Grand National as a jockey. Didn't get a look in?
Yeah, like, I mean, the contenders, like, I mean, he's 100% down here. I was going to go through them. So, like, will we go through the non-GEA ones then?
Yeah, come on.
Will we go through the who didn't make it? So, my list there, like, so we can start with Jim Cullerty, like, without question. has to be in contention when it comes to non-GEA people here. Obviously, rode best mate to 3 consecutive Cheltenham Gold Cups, won the Grand National as well as a jockey, and then trained a Gold Cup winner as well with Lord Windermere in 2014. That is an incredible box-ticking exercise from anybody involved in national hunt racing, but he's not going to make it because I don't think he is anywhere near as revered in the county of Kerry as footballers. Somebody who would have come so much closer to this mountain is somebody like Mick Galway. 130 Munster appearances, went on to the Lions Tour to New Zealand in 1993. The vast majority of his Munster appearances, over 80 of them, came as captain of Munster. But what kind of creates the legend with him is that he won an All-Ireland with Kerry in 1986, was captain in 1989, didn't play a whole pile for Kerry, but still has his Celtic cross, goes on to have an unbelievably illustrious rugby career. But even without the GEA, you still have to put him into consideration. Moss Keane, another person who would have dabbled in a good bit of GEA, he is also in consideration. 51 appearances for Ireland, which is obviously humongous given the era in which he played. 11 unbroken years in the 5 nations Moss Keane appeared in. Only Willie John McBride and Fergus Slattery had reached 50 caps from a forwards perspective in the Ireland team before Moss Keane did. And of course, he was part of that All Black, the part of the Munster team that beat the All Blacks, Lions tourist in 1977. Checks all those boxes as well, and an incredible omission. Then you start looking at other sports. So we've covered racing and we've covered rugby there. Just 2 of the potential names. There are other racing names and other rugby names, which I won't be able to get to. But if we move on to another sport that's not involved here, we can talk about athletics here. And one person I want to mention is Gillian O'Sullivan here, who was unfortunately hampered so much in her career by injury. She won silver in the walk in 2003 in the World Championships. This is in the post-Sonia era. This is after her silver medal in Sydney. And we suddenly had our next superstar in athletics, obviously in a totally different discipline, in the walk. She was from the same athletics club as I was, so she was an absolute legend in our house. There is still a photograph of her hanging on our wall in our kitchen, a photograph of her with our family. She was an icon. I actually did a community games project on her when I was 10 years old. This is how much of a hero she was to me. But injury derailed her. She was a silver medalist in 03, as I say, was destined going for gold in Athens in 2004 and didn't even walk. She had a terrible injury problems throughout her entire career, and this derailed her at the key moment, unfortunately. It is a true story of heartbreak. If you talk then about some other athletics characters in the county, Jerry Kiernan has to get a mention, doesn't he? I mean, obviously, a huge profile with his punditry, but you can't sniff at the idea that he was a top 10 finisher in the marathon in the 1984 Olympic Games. He won the Dublin Marathon twice. He is an absolutely brilliant athlete, and will go down in the annals of history as Kerry's best marathon runner, potentially.
Great coach.
So this is where we're at now. I'm not sure, do you want to take a pause here? There are a couple of other names I want to mention outside of GEA that are very important, but I know I've been yapping on for a while on these names.
Kieran, is there anybody outside of GEA that you thought should be on your mountain?
Yeah, I had a few. I suppose Paddy O'Connor would have been one that was like he's widely regarded as probably one of the top 3 all-time basketball players ever to play in Ireland, and he was the guy who kind of kicked off bringing the Americans over here, and not only bringing over Americans, but bringing over Americans who just missed the NBA draft, who just missed that 50 picks. Europe wasn't a really place where they started to come. And not only did he kind of rejuvenate the Irish scene, but, you know, I think a lot of other countries learned off him as well in bringing over Americans. So that influx of Americans into European basketball and probably paved the way, likewise, for Europeans going to the NBA. But Paddy was huge and an iconic figure in basketball in Kerry, and definitely our best basketballer ever. So he was one that definitely would have got a mention. And I suppose Ty Kennelly as well, even though he did win an All-Ireland with Kerry. I think what he did in his international rules career is unbelievable. 197 games, premiership. Not only one of the best defenders on the Sydney Swans team, but probably one of the best defenders in the league, and consistently broke the mold, as in a guy who went over there. Probably Steins probably was the first guy, but Kennelly was the guy who did what Steins did, and then kind of carried home the trophy as well, which is obviously kind of separated him. But even in his time in Australia, I kind of look back on say he didn't go to Australia, would he be up for this list? You know, if he didn't go to Australia, if he had the same timeline in his career as he has in Australia, he would have played in 10 All-Ireland finals for Kerry, winning maybe 6, losing 4, and you know, that would have been a lot of success. And even the 4 we lost, if you think of the 4 we lost, Armagh, Dublin, you know, he could have had an influence in those games of the type of player he was and how dynamic he was. And even at us later on in his career, he was still so dynamic. His fitness levels were off the charts. He could run people into the ground. He absolutely ran Graham Canty, who was one of the best of all time, into the ground in the 2009 final for Donegal Walsh to come on and kind of and finish him off. But you know, he was a guy who what he did going down there as a 17-year-old and having to play in the position he did. Steins had the advantage of being huge. And kind of, you know, once you were big and you're in the ruck, and then he had his athletic ability from the football, was able to kind of make him this kind of combine package, which really blew the Aussies away. All of a sudden, they had this big, huge man that could actually move and was quite nimble from his GA days. Wasn't just used to being in rucks, knocking balls down all the time. This guy could move and this guy could kick. But Kennelly went over there as a halfback, a fullback, and you know. Really, his game, his goal kicking, powering on from the half-back line, and his accuracy of kicking. He was the guy that was trusted with taking the restart kick from the goal square, and that's always the best kicker. So a guy to go down there when he was 19 and to be the best kicker on his team by the time he's 21 just shows you what he put into the game.
Yeah. Oh, and I hadn't thought of Tadhg Kennelly being a candidate, really, for the top 4 Kerry sports people. Did he make your consideration?
He did. There are 2 names here from athletes who would have excelled in other sports here, when it comes to men anyway, that I've got down. Tadhg Kennelly is one of them. I think, as Kieran says, it would have been interesting to see what would have happened, not only to him, but to Kerry as a whole, had he actually been here for the entire duration of his athletic career. But I think the fact that he went down and was such a revelation in Australia means he probably automatically ticks the box of, will he be remembered in 100 years? Of course he will. He was the Kerry man who went down to Australia and made it big. The other person we have to mention here, and I know he's not going to take any credit for this, is the other fella on the line there, Ger. And Kieran Donaghy has been somebody that's definitely been mentioned when it comes to tweeting to me over the course of the weekend. If you're talking about a person who is going to be revered within their town and their county, and you talk about great basketball people, Kieran's up there, Ger, as much as he won't take credit, and I'll move off this in a sec, Kieran, I promise. But like in terms of going from the town hero to the county hero, it was such an explosion, and it went from a cult hero to an all-star winner as Footballer of the Year in 2006, somebody who transformed the fortunes of Kerry in the middle of that decade, a hugely important cog, and everybody knows that. Like, nobody needs to be told that. But then what he has done for basketball in Tralee, basketball in Kerry, it is a basketball-mad county in huge patches. And basketball in this country as a whole, it's not just localised to the town and to the county, the country as a whole. And you can be sure that will continue down the line in terms of whatever is done with Basketball Ireland and with that sport in this country as well. 100% worth a mention. So those 2 in particular came to mind in terms of modern stars.
Briefly, just to echo all of that and to say 2 things. One, the only good thing to come out of reality TV is you and the underdogs. And second, could you not finally just break with this tradition of everybody being humble and go, yeah, I'm putting myself on the mountain. Come on.
If I put my head in the mountain, they'd be saying my head is so big that it'll take 15 years to carve it out, I'd say. But yeah, no, I'm not putting myself near the mountain. I'm looking at 4 names here I don't have in the mountain. I'm definitely nowhere near it. So it's no, the mountain is reserved for the real upper echelons of superstardom in this county, and I may have well have done a few bits and pieces that I'll be remembered for, I'm not sure about 100 years, but I don't see myself anywhere near it. So sorry, Ger. I know you'd love me to come on here and say, yeah, absolutely. I'm number 1 on the list. Actually, that's where I put myself. I'm the guy that's out front, and we'll put everybody else behind me. I think people would say that I finally completely lost it. So no, I didn't give myself even consideration. My name isn't even on my piece of paper, and there's about 30 names on this piece of paper in front of me. So No, Jar. Sorry, is that okay?
Tommy's in my ear saying Tim Moynihan said at the weekend on Radio Kerry that Kieran Donaghy had as much of an impact on football as Stephen Cluxton. It took years for teams to figure out a way to stop him, caused the same sort of issues for teams. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that, Kieran, because I know you're too humble, but shut up.
I think teams and me fairly quickly figured out with systems they were able to play against us and make it hard for us. But I do give the Bomber and Mikey the good slagging all the time that, they had it a bit easier than us. Myself and Gooch would hot ball with them when we were around them, saying, you had it easier, you're one-on-one, and you never had to deal with blanket defences, etc. But look, those guys are different level altogether.
How long was Jordan out of the game for before he made his comeback? How long do you have to be out before you're thinking about making a comeback?
It'll be around the same timelines now if I release the press statement saying I'm back, and then fellas would say, yeah, you're back on the bench, I'd say.
But I think if you needed any mark of greatness, it's how much do Dublin fans hate you as a footballer. And if you heard the jeers that Donaghy used to get in Croke Park whenever he came on or got taken off, that would probably tick the box up. Will this fella be remembered in time to come? But no, definitely on the list. I've got a few other names here in terms of non-GAA people. Will I go through them?
Yeah, because we're going to get to the GAA lads pretty quick, because I think there's probably going to be a lot of consensus around 2 picks anyway. So.
Yeah, but just one person who would have come quite close to the list as well in terms of non-GAA people is Steve Crusher Casey, the toughest man, I dare say, to ever come out of Kerry, potentially even Ireland. So in 1938, the Crusher Casey was crowned heavyweight wrestling champion of the world. He retained this title for 9 years until he retired undefeated in the year 1947, the only Irishman ever to retain a world title in any discipline for such an extended period of time. His entire career, his entire family is fascinating. A family of unbelievably athletic brothers from Sneem in County Kerry. 1935, that year, with the aid of his brothers Tom and Mick, they were rowers as well. They entered the All-England Rowing Championships, which would, of course, been a natural springboard for the Nazi Olympic Games in Berlin. But unfortunately, due to the fact that they had wrestled professionally, they were disqualified from the rowing competition when they went to Germany. Most of the observers at the time said they would have won all of the 6 rowing titles on offer in Germany had they gone. Jim Casey, one of the brothers, said Jesse Owens showed Adolf Hitler how poor his Aryan race really was in the aftermath of that. Then Crusher Casey enters the boxing ring in 1940. He immediately challenges Joe Louis for the World Heavyweight Championship, and this is said to be the only refusal in the entire career of Joe Louis. Joe Louis ran scared of this man from Sneem. He is absolutely in consideration for this. The New York Post headline was, "Even the greatest run scared of the Sneem machine." Like, as I said, the family was incredible. There was the physical prowess of the man, 6'4" in height, 17 stones in weight. He was a bit of an exception when you think that people from Ireland of yesteryear were malnourished and all that. Not this guy. There was a poem written about this family in 1938, only 4 lines, it's short, written by Brian McMahon, and it goes like this. The boys of the Kingdom of Kerry seen glory on many a field, but the brothers called Casey from Kerry at wrestling were surely the cream. The most famous of all, the spin, flip and fall, was the famous Steve Casey from Sneem. And he is well remembered. He's got himself an iron statue down in Sneem. And speaking of iron, one other person I need to mention is Iron Man Mick Murphy, who won the Ross in 1958, one of the most eccentric characters to ever come out of Kerry in any discipline, let alone sport. So he won the Ross in 1958 after taking up riding his bicycle in 1957. Now, one of his dreams as a child was to join the circus, and he used his confirmation money in order to buy a book on bodybuilding, and he befriended a local circus performer. He then went on, after using this manual, to make a gym out of stone, and he became obsessed with diet. The legend is that he used to go to the butcher, buy raw steaks, and eat them raw. Cow's blood was what made Mick Murphy Iron Man. The legend has that one day he had to steal a bike in order to win a stage of a race. He broke his collarbone the day before winning a stage. He started hallucinating in hospital that the medical professionals were body snatchers. He escaped, left the hospital, and won the race the next day. This was all during the Ross in 1958. He went to a dance in the middle of the night to ensure that his shoulder didn't go fully stiff. This guy is mental. He is one of the great characters of Irish sport. And in 1958, when he won that Ross, he raced past the finish line and people couldn't find him. And he told the Irish Independent that he went looking for a gym to train in. Failing to find one, he rode out of town until he found a field with a stone wall. There, he spent an hour lifting weights before taking blood from a cow and drinking it, a training tip he had received from Russian weightlifters. So all these different things are put into this story here. And over the next 30 years, then, just to finish up on him, he competed in various sports, winning amateur competitions in boxing, wrestling, and your favourite sport, Ger, darts. And he did, of course, join the circus eventually to live his boyhood dream.
Okay. Right, let's get down to football. Mick O'Connell, Mick O'Dwyer, I presume this is where we're starting, is it?
Yeah, let's start with the first pick. For me, this is sort of a banker, certainly when you're thinking about it initially. You want to give the mountain some sort of historical context for sure. And there are two names, if you go deep into history, who would probably have been in contention for the first pick here, which would have been Dick Fitzgerald and Dr. Eoin O'Sullivan. I know we had Micheal on earlier, but he's previously said that the first superstar in Gaelic football was Dick Fitzgerald. So he won the first All-Ireland for Kerry and became one of the first to win 5 All-Irelands and an unbelievably stylish football, wrote the book How to Play Gaelic Football. Dr. Eoin O'Sullivan then came shortly after, was responsible for helping to build Fitzgerald Stadium, named after Dick Fitzgerald, of course. And he also literally wrote the book on football. His one was called The Art and Science of Gaelic Football. But the legacy of these men is embodied, in my opinion, in somebody like Mick O'Connell, who is the first pick on this Mount Rushmore. Mick O'Connell is Don Vito Corleone, born on an island. And as you know, Ger, you do not mess with Mick O'Connell. He has got everything you need to be a legend. He's mysterious. He's enigmatic. And he's also just unbelievably emblematic of what you want to see in a Kerry footballer, a superb high fielder, a superb kicker of the ball. He only won 4 All-Irelands, and I think he is somewhat unlucky to have been born in the generation he was. 1959 was his first All-Ireland, captain at the age of 22, immediately is recognised as one of the best to ever do it, and that is represented in him being named in both the Team of the Century and Team of the Millennium in midfield. If you talk about the 2000s, Kieran, as a tough time for Kerry football in terms of teams figuring them out, those Down and Galway teams of the 60s were exceptional, and they really had Mick O'Connell figured out to a point. They double and they triple marked him, but he still managed to prevail in a few All-Irelands, and 4, as I say, in total. Just the final point on this is that Denny Breen of the 1903 team said he was the best footballer he had ever seen, and this is 50 years after that. So from the first section of the 20th century, he is the greatest. And then you just get into the pride of place that he has in his islands, in Valentia Island, and how many opportunities he passed up in his life to actually stay put in the island. That bridge wasn't built until the early 70s, so he was rowing to and from the mainland to get to training. Notoriously did not celebrate any All-Irelands, left Sam Maguire after him in the dressing room in 1959. And he's also got a poem written about him, which we can get into if we want.
Kieran, as a young lad in Kerry, how important are these names? Are they legitimately inspirational as a means for you to follow and stand on the shoulders of? Or is there a level of intimidation that comes from trying to reach the level of previous generations?
No, there would be none of that with me in a way, but there would have been just the figures, that the storytellers and the old people that you'd meet. They were very good back in the day, and still are, of importing their philosophy on why Kerry are good at football onto you at a very young age. And what they want to talk about is the people that they made their sandwiches and filled their flasks of tea and got on the ghost train and went up to Dublin to see this Micheal Mick O'Connell cantering around Croke Park with more style and panache than anybody else out there. And Eoin is right, he is a mysterious man. My dad came down from Tyrone one time at a trip, and he got the notion in his head to go down. He wanted to meet Mick O'Connell and he wanted to meet Maurice Fitzgerald, and he met them all in the one day. And when I say that he did not stop talking about that day for months and years afterwards, It was an understatement. And, you know, literally into the car, down to Valencia, acrossing the bridge, and then knocking on doors looking for this Mick O'Connell. And the amount of people that do that, and Mick is an amazing character. But, you know, even that old footage, Ger, of him kicking the ball off the wall, how high he gets up into the air, how classy he was kicking it. If you think now, if you put him in the beautiful new Predators and you gave him the brand new ball, can you imagine? He'd make it talk. He'd be almost like a Kieran McDonald type of a player around the middle of the field, soaring over everybody, catching kickouts, and then being able to kick points from long distance and to spray passes around the place on the inside and outside of either boot. I would say he had that level of ability, and the story behind him and the rowing over to training. He had 2 strength and conditioning sessions done before he ever put his head in the pillow, and that was without the mad stuff they were probably doing at training at that time. So those figures and the Mick O'Dwyers and the Mick O'Connells and even the golden era team of 75 to 86, I don't think they put pressure on players because you kind of know at the start it's going to be very hard to do what they did, but all you got to do is try and implement or try and do your best to bring your style to it and try and just carry on the tradition, because that was a big thing I said when I retired is it's when you really start getting to the end, you know, you really chase the jersey and you want that jersey to be yours, and it's all about being yours for your entire career. You want number 14, or if you're a back, you want number 5 or whatever, and that drive to get that position and that shirt on your back every time you can for Kerry is overwhelming, and it's all consuming to get it. And then kind of at the end of your career, you kind of realize, oh yeah, this is how it works. I'm just minding it for the next great player that's going to come along and carry on the tradition. So I think the Mick O'Connells and passed it down to Jack O'Shea, and Jack passed it on to Dara, and that's the way it kind of goes. And you know, whether Dara has 6 All-Irelands and Mick O'Connell has 4, you know, it's how they did it, and it's the style they did it in, and they always did it in the right way. And that's one thing that we're very proud of in Kerry, is doing things the right way, and certainly that man did it.
You mentioned a poem there, Eoin. Give us it.
Well, I'm not going to do this justice. We should have Micheal O'Muircheartaigh reading this out, but this is a poem by Brendan Kennelly about Mick O'Connell, and the last 2 lines here in particular just kind of sum up Mick O'Connell. So it goes like this. He had to reach the island in the winter gale. He pushed the little boat over the rough stones till she came afloat. You'd swear he could see nothing when he hoisted sail and cut the dark. Once a grey shape blurred above his head while pitch black waters slapped and tried to climb over the side but dropped into the sea thwarted. In the time he heard the special thunder of the island shore, he hauled the boat in, sheltered near a rock, and smiled to hear the sea's defeated roar. Breathing as though the air were infinitely sweet, he watched the mainland where the hard wind struck. The island clay felt good beneath his feet, a man undeceived by victory or defeat. And I think you probably got that sense when you spoke to him a couple of years ago, Jared, the man undeceived by victory or defeat, the very clear conscience to put everything into context in a sporting sense.
Yeah, he spoke about there were 4 quarters to his life. The first quarter was being a kid, the second quarter was playing football, and then after that there's loads more of life, and certainly put it in context. So he's number 1 on your list. Mick O'Dwyer second, I guess, is he?
Yeah, and probably the biggest banker of the whole lot, Mick O'Dwyer. Mick O'Dwyer is Yoda, if you want to keep these comparisons going. Like, his legacy is going to be around forever. There's no question about that. It's more than 100, 200 years. Like, the legacy will be centred around him as a manager. But I think you alluded to this earlier on yourself, Jared, that as a player alone, he would have had an unbelievable reputation, because he basically retired early from the game, had retired in the middle of his career, like Mick O'Connell did, by the way. He retired in the middle and came back to win 2 more All-Irelands. But Mick O'Dwyer broke both of his legs in 1964 and reinvented himself as a corner forward after being a wing back late in his career. And not only does he reinvent himself as a corner forward, he becomes the top scorer in Ireland on multiple occasions. He becomes the best corner forward in Ireland for a couple of years after breaking both of his legs. It's incredible, really. And then the turnover from playing to management is rapid fire. 1974, he stops playing. 1975, he's manager. Obviously, we all know the story of him legendarily giving youth its chance immediately and winning that famous All-Ireland in 1975. But that came from him being under-21s manager at the same time. And for the first 3 years, he won All-Irelands with them. So basically, Micheal Dwyer didn't have a year where he wasn't involved in an All-Ireland winning team as a manager for about 6 or 7 years. So it's incredible, really, that the stat line as a player and manager, if we throw them all in together, it's 12 All-Irelands, 26 provincial titles. Of course, Kildare and Laois played their part in there. He has beaten every single county in Ireland as a manager of a team. And the stuff that kind of takes it to the next level, even in terms of being a legend, is whether it's Adidas or Bendix or Milk. Like, he knew the commercial potential of the GAA before many others did. Like, that Bendix ad is possibly the raunchiest thing to come out of 20th century Ireland. I'm not sure what society prepared for a lot of topless Kerry lads putting their jersey into a washing machine. Kerry is not known for being cool, but Micheal Dwyer was the suavest man that the county has possibly ever produced. And he's still horrified by what happened in 1982. There's always a little wrinkle there, and that still gnaws at him.
What do you think about this, Kieran?
Yeah, like Micheal, again, talking about a fellow who did it the right way. And he was the most, like, Galvin did a fashion range on him. Like, his style from back then he was a stylish man, he was a classy man. And he was a baller, and he was his own right. He said he was a power running half back. And after the accident had to reinvent himself, and even some of his points he kicked going out the field, little fist pumps to the crowd, little fist pumps to his teammate to get people going. You could tell he was a motivator from the very beginning. The way he managed that team, was remarkable, really, because they were good. But you have to remember, it's like the Ferguson. I forget what's the lad that saved Ferguson's job that time when he got the goal.
Mark Robbins.
Mark Robbins, yeah. Like, to be honest, Micheal was under pressure after 77. They were this winning loads of under-21s All-Irelands. They'd won the All-Ireland in 75, and then this Dublin machine kind of thumped them in 76 and 77. And I'd say it's why he holds the Bomber in such high regard, because the Bomber did come in and change things. And but I think what Micheal did in Kerry as a player and a manager had him in iconic status in Kerry. But I think he came into more people's hearts with what he went on and did with Kildare and what he did with Laois, like winning provincial championships with them, taking them to All-Ireland finals, putting them on the brink, giving them the belief. And again, like, if you look at his management style, and I was down to him, I called him, I'd say, in October, I think. I was down in Waterville and I just called over for a cup of tea to him. His house is a walking distance from my father-in-law's place. So, and even then he still talked about, like, your team, get your team going, like, be all about your team. Don't worry too much about the opposition. He goes, I realise now in this modern day, you have to kind of know what they're doing, and you have to prepare for all that. I get all that. But he said the biggest thing is talk to your players about how good they are and how good they're going to play and what they're going to do, and focus on them on the day of the game. So it was something I took away going out of it, because I was just going in taking the college team that year. And look, as a player and a manager, and what he did, like, he won the O'Byrne Cup with Wicklow. I don't know, did he have 100 people that wanted to come and play for Wicklow when he took them over? Of course, his training regimes were old school, but that's what he knew, and that's what he knew worked. So you can't blame him for not wanting to change. I know fellas had goes of him that his training wasn't. But what he was also doing, and I talked to him about this because we did a run on a beach a number of years ago with Kerry, a kind of a balls to the wall kind of 8K run, and it was a race, and it was a mental challenge more than anything else. And the management sat up in the dunes as we went, like the clappers, and I brought this up to Micheal, and he said, like, doing them bits is no harm. You'll find a few wasters, and you'll find the complainers, and you'll find the fellas who'll go to ground when the real shit hits the fan. And he said, you want all your tough fellas driving on, and even though they're wrecked in the run, that they keep powering through it, and they keep just going, that they don't stop or they don't give up. Like he said, keep an eye out for those fellas, because they're the guys who are going to let you down. And he said the guys that keep going and the guys that run through the pain and the guys that do the hard training, and they're the guys that are going to be there when the chips are down on big days. But he and I think they'd have fun chiseling him on the wall, and I think chiseling him into the mountain, because he's an easy pick, and as my mother said long ago, he was easy to look at too when he was playing and manager. So, and my grandmother said the same. So he had that about him as well. But a pure class act, and very well deserving of being on Kerry's Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, people are going to wonder, is that Michael Fassbender up there? No, it's Mick O'Dwyer. Eoin, so that's two. Mick O'Connell, Mick O'Dwyer. Then we come to the more difficult stuff. How do you separate any of the individuals from that great team? Or I don't know, do you want to do the modern era first and then go back to the great team? Which of these is going to be the more contentious, do you think? Or difficult?
It's tough. It's a tough one. I think the modern team and the most modern selection probably will be the most contentious. When I thought through the golden age, I actually ended up with an answer that I'm fairly happy with, and I think actually is a banker, to be honest with you. My third pick is Paddy O'Shea. Paddy O'Shea is Rocky Balboa. He has this legend status that is always going to be there, not just from his 8 All-Ireland medals, but from the fact that he is absolutely hard as nails. The story goes that when he met Charles Haughey once, and Haughey was on crutches, he said, "Paddy, have you ever broken a bone during your playing career?" And Paddy said, No, Taoiseach, none of my own. And that sums up Paddy O'Shea. Denny Allen slapped him in the face. He punched Denny Allen back in the face, and then he shook Denny Allen's hand. That sums up Paddy O'Shea. Hard as nails, but a gentleman at the end of the day. And you can make the argument, I will sit here and listen to your argument, that Jack O'Shea, that John Egan, that Mikey Sheehy, that Barry Liston, that Ogie Moran were all better footballers than him. You can make arguments for all of those. But in terms of being a legend, Paddy O'Shea is number one. He will be the man that is remembered long beyond them, not least because of the management career. He ends the 11-year famine in 1997, does it again in 2000, goes up to Westmeath, wins the Leinster title with them. And the legend is just enhanced by the man that he is. Nobody else could be as well remembered as managing Westmeath as he is for hosting Tom Cruise and Dolly Parton in his pub. Like, name anybody else who could call his supporters effing animals and actually get away with it. Actually still be held in unbelievably high regard after saying that. And we'll all remember the day he died, just pure heartbreak, an awful, awful day where everybody remembers where they were when they heard it on the radio or saw it on Twitter or wherever they got the news. It was something that shook everybody, not least because of how young and how tragic the whole thing was, but also because of what an icon this man was. And he lived an unbelievable life, and he will be as well remembered as anybody in Kerry GAA in 100 years. And I honestly believe he will be better remembered than that entire generation of footballer.
That's a pretty compelling argument. A counter argument is that it's probably Jack O'Shea's team. If we think about whose team it was, the best player, the most dynamic player, the most outrageously gifted player, maybe that's unfair. Maybe the most dominant player is Jacko. Is he not? Am I missing something here, Kieran?
No, you're not. You're making a valid point, and I think Eoin is as well, to be quite honest with you. Sure, Jacko is 4 Player of the Years, 3 All-Ireland, 21s in a row, and obviously all his success. And he was, I suppose, the engine room, but it's you know, Paddy again, another guy who went up and like you have to take that, even though he's going on Kerry's Mount Rushmore, it's his Kerry iconic status that rejuvenates a county like Westmeath to go on and win a Leinster championship and you know, like to do that, beating Dublin and beating Laois along the way, who were really strong at the time. It's amazing that he was able to get that done, and how tuned in he was that year, and you know, he had a point to prove, and he's iconic, and the stuff he got up to, and the contacts he had, and you know, he was a rogue, and he was a howl, and he was like he conceded 1 point in 10 All-Ireland finals. Like, you know, like you could say Jacko was the engine room, but Paddy's clamping down a lot of great forwards in those years, like, you know. But to play in 10 or 11 finals and to concede 1 point off you is is remarkable. Considering 3 of those finals, he was probably back at cornerback. So no, I get you, but you could kind of say it could be Bomber's team as well. Like, you know, Bomber has 7 and Jacko has 7, and you know, as much as Jacko was great around the middle of the field, Bomber was the guy who scored 3-2 in that first All-Ireland final to get Kerry back on track in 78, and then he was the guy who was making the other guys around him better. He was also able to take his own scores. So you could kind of make cases for all those guys, and they all carried Kerry at stages. But, you know, I think the 4 player of the year is you know, going to be very hard to beat in time. But he has to, Paddy, I agree with Eoin. I think I do agree with Eoin. I think Paddy's on mine as well. And yeah, I think that for the reason of everything he did, Railway Cups, he was captain in 84. He brought the cup back west as captain in 84. He brought it back as manager in 97. You know, I don't think there is an honour. He hasn't won in the game. He's 4 Railway Cups as well, I think. You know, he's 2 county championships. You know, you look at the Gaeltacht club that went to an All-Ireland club final, you know, with his 3 nephews playing. Don't tell me Paddy wasn't a big reason in the next wave of not only Gaeltacht players but Kerry players going on as well. So yeah, he's definitely deserving of his spot.
There's no mention of Spillane. I feel like Spillane's punditry has somehow devalued his playing career because, again, from my memory, and granted I was very young watching that team, is that he was this kind of flash of brilliance, like a cross between an inside forward and the hard running of somebody like Galvin. So like a hybrid Gooch Galvin type player. Yeah,
and he was the guy that was going back into the half-back line, and he was the guy tackling back in 86 against Tyrone. He was the guy who started this kind of retreating half-forward, getting on ball, because he had his own injury problems with his own knees and miraculous comeback from them knee injuries at that stage in 86. So he was playing this kind of, as you rightly said, he wasn't the 75 speed merchant that was able to kick points over his shoulder from 45 yards. You know, when you meet Spillane, you see the size of him, you see the size of the man he is. And yeah, maybe you are right. Maybe his punditry has maybe affected his status in the team. But, you know, even if you look at those you could make a case for every one of them, to be honest. Like, especially the 5 fellas that have 8 medals. You know, there's no reason why all of them guys couldn't be up for this honour of being up there. But you know, Spillane was a Rolls Royce of a player, don't get me wrong, and could very well be in this conversation. But I think in iconic status levels, I think Pio is ahead of him.
So the 6 footballers of 8 All-Ireland, apparently. So it's Ger Power, Ogie Moore and Paddy. Did I say this? Did I say Ger Power twice? Ger Power, Mikey Shee and Pat Spillane. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard to, like, they're all pretty good, but like...
Yeah, like Ogie Moore, every time Ogie Moore started at centre forward, like Kerry won the All-Ireland, do you know what I mean? And he's 8 finals that he started at 11, they won, and every time he started at somewhere else, they didn't. So maybe that's something we'll have to bring up with Mico if we get him on to talk about his place on the mountain, maybe. Why wasn't Ogie Moore just a banker 11 every time? Because Ogie was amazing too, like, talk about a gentleman. And you know, I think when people see him, they're taken back at, like, you know, this guy is smaller than a lot of people think, but by God, did he let you know, he was there. He was non-stop action. You know, he was Declan Sullivan before Declan Sullivan came along on that team, and he drove that team, as I said, to All-Ireland. So, like, that's the point I'm kind of making. Like, you know, Ger Power won them at 15, 12, 7. You know, where do you want me to play, lads? Ger Power could have played anywhere. Like, he was a club mate of mine. Yeah, Tommy Walsh figure. Like, anywhere you want, I'll go out and do it. I'll go out and do the job. So any of those fellas could be up for consideration. But I think Pio's, the lure, the management career he had, even the bit with Westmeath, all adds on to that thing that Owen's talking about. Maybe, and he's probably right to think about it that way. I didn't think about it that way myself. Who'll be remembered in 100 or 200 years? But I think Paddy, for what he's done and how outspoken he was and how much he was in the media, etc. Going forward was going to put him up there slightly ahead of the other four guys.
Bear in mind, putting people on a mountain at hundreds of thousands of people are going to see every year will mean that you are automatically remembered for the next 200 years. So, Owen, I think there's a bit of a cop out there. Okay, give me your last one.
So the last one's going to be another Gaelic footballer. I think if football ended in the mid-90s or in the early 90s, Mary Jo Curran would have been up there with her 11 All-Stars, her 10 All-Irelands, her 9 in a row. Her, as I said at the start, herself and Cora Staunton widely regarded as the two best in their sport ever. Mary Gainey is another person from around that era who would have been a shoo-in as well, except she won 3 Camogie All-Irelands for Cork, so automatically scratching her off in terms of her potential for giving the great enemy so many All-Irelands. So no, it came back to some of the golden era where you could have Jack O'Shea, who could still work his way in here. He was one of the 3 contenders at the very end here. It was either going to be Jack O'Shea or Maurice Fitzgerald or Colm the Gooch Cooper. And I will say that Jack O'Shea's case is not helped by the fact that Paddy and to a certain extent Micheal are already on the mountain. And also as well, South Kerry is fairly well catered for already on that mountain. I've gone for Gooch. Colm Cooper is Harry Potter. It's the magic he brought to every single game he was involved with, being touted from such a young age. Like if we talk about memorable moments in our lives, I will remember when I was first told about Gooch and how we were first going into Killarney to watch Gooch play and how that was such a big thing and how his gait was noticeable. He was a slight fella, and this was all part of the legend of Gooch. Like this was a guy who was going to try and make it on skill alone in an era where skill alone was no longer going to be the only thing you needed. At a time of toughness when Armagh and Tyrone were going to come along and bully you, and bully him they did do on certain occasions, but he is the Messi of Gaelic football. You look to the magic he produced, you look at the All-Irelands that he won. He gets criticised for being part of a Kerry team that won All-Ireland finals easily, which is one of the most bizarre arguments out there. They won All-Ireland finals easily because he was the most insanely gifted forward I have ever seen on a football pitch. The one thing that became the thing that he just couldn't get his hands on was that Club All-Ireland. We had that famous AIB, the toughest dad and all that sort of thing, which really rubbed salt in the wounds of his injury in 2014. But he got his Club All-Ireland in 2017. He put the cherry on top of that cake. If you put him on this Mount Rushmore, what you've then got is an involvement in all of Kerry's Sam Maguire wins over the last 65 years. That is what you get from putting Gooch up there in terms of the timeline. If you accept that he's on a similar level with Maurice Fitzgerald and Jack O'Shea, and that for me was the real deal sealer. The last 65 years of Kerry winning All-Irelands are entirely covered on my Mount Rushmore, and for that reason he gets over the line, and my final pick is Colm Cooper.
That's kind of political. What, you're leaving off Maurice Fitz? I can't believe it. Maurice Fitz, your childhood hero. Here is a picture of a young Owen Sheehan. What age are you in this picture, Owen?
I don't know, like
5. Yeah, you could bang with a 5-year-old, all right. And Maurice Fitz looking young.
Well, I will accept that Gooch is the pick that is most open to being taken down here today off Kieran Donaghy, but because I wasn't there to...
You look a bit like him in that picture.
The peak of Maurice Fitz. I wasn't there to see the peak of Jack O'Shea, but there was enough video evidence to recognise their greatness, and I still maintain that Gooch is the best modern footballer that Kerry have ever had. And even if you're not taking into account the timeline, he would be a serious contender, and he encapsulates what we like to see in a Kerry footballer as well, which is pure magic skill and an ability to do things with the ball that the ordinary human can't do. He had all of that. He was amazing.
The comments disagree. They're saying it has to be Maurice Fitz. He didn't have the players around him that Gooch had. Maurice Fitz was the most skillful ever to kick a ball. Kieran, it's time for us to get your choices before we kind of insist that you take one of these off or make a change for us. Who would have been on your Mount Rushmore?
Are you insisting? Well, I'm similar to Eoin, but the change I have was I Mary Jo Curran at 4 because if Mary Jo Curran was around today, like we know. All the Rena Buckleys and the Dublin girls that are playing, the Lindsay Davies, all these brilliant players that are playing now, and that there's 60,000 people at the game, and the games are, we all sit down and watch the All-Ireland ladies finals now. They have great skill levels. It's great to watch. The pace is good. The clock is good. It's exciting near the end. Some of the Cork and Dublin battles over the last number of years, but if you could transport that 82 to 93 Kerry team with a club mate of mine, Marina Barry. But Mary Jo Kern had 11 All-Irelands. She's 9 in a row. She's 10 All-Stars. It's off the charts, and she's a great coach as well. And she's the most humble person. She brought a busload of her school kids into a Warriors game last year, and we stood around for photos afterwards. And I was kind of hopping ball off all the kids, like kind of going, "Do you realise how much of a legend this person is, lads? Do you actually get it?" And they not a clue. And she wouldn't let me even talk about her in that way. So I had her down on my list as 4, because I have another Mount Rushmore next to the one that Eoin has, and that's just the Mount Rushmores of 13s, and that's Gooch, Mikey, Fitzy, and David Clifford. They're up there, and they're going to have their own mountain, as in corner forward mountains, because that lineage and how they've passed that jersey down along the line to each other is quite remarkable. And my head was wrecked trying to pick between the 3 of those boys. Mikey Sheehy, a club mate of mine, 8 All-Irelands, an unbelievable player, had a bit of magic like Gooch, took the freeze, just a class act, could have went to Manchester United, could have went kicking ball for the Miami Dolphins, chose Kerry, won All-Irelands, won a club All-Ireland like Gooch, has all the county championships as well, and was right there. And then you have Maurice Fitz. How would you leave Maurice Fitz, for such a good-looking man? You'd have to really leave his face up there as well. Like, you couldn't, if it was a beauty pageant and you wanted the mountain to look good, Maurice Fitz is going to be on it. Let's call a spade a spade. And if they could fit his legs in, all bets are off. It'd be the whole country would stop and take photos of this mountain, and we could sell it to the Americans. Kerry tourism would go through the roof even more. But yeah, I when I hear the change, when I hear you insist on making a change, the only I think I'd be forced to put Gooch off, and I'm not going to do it, because like Eoin said, everything about Gooch, he's loved throughout the whole country, because of the way he played it. And as I said earlier on, I really do think, I trained with him for 12 years, and we played some trial game, or for 14 or 15 years, we played trial games where we didn't play sweepers or defensive systems in trial games. It was 15 fellas are trying to show off and trying to get on the team. And some of the stuff that fella would do, you see the Premiership guys, they send out these videos of guys doing stuff in training. If we had the cameras on our training sessions, one-on-one, against some of the best cornerbacks, Mark O'Shea is one of the best cornerbacks to ever play the game, and himself and Gooch was a joy to behold, because, Mark would beat him to a ball, and then Gooch would beat him to a ball, and Gooch would sell him a dummy solo, and his skill level. And if he was one-on-one for his career, and people have had cuts off him because he couldn't handle, certain systems, or the certain systems were extremely hard to handle. Yeah, when you're playing football and you're a corner forward and your job is to score for the team, and the pressure on you going into the final is to score for the team, and you're playing with defenders around you everywhere, it is harder to express yourself and show how good you are, because of the amount of bodies.
Sure.
And if it was a one-on-one situation, Gooch would be just an automatic.
Are you saying you're not making any changes to Owen's mountain?
Yeah.
What can I say?
I have
too good at this.
I've got one final pitch. Paul Galvin has given us a video to try and change your minds. Let's have a look.
Morning, boys. Best luck this morning picking your Kerry Sporting Mount Rushmore. Difficult task. I wouldn't fancy it myself now. No doubt Kieran there has spent a good deal of the time trying to convince Eoin to have himself on the list. But Eoin, look, don't give in to that. I think Kieran has a bit more to do now to make lists like that. But I have a couple of suggestions for you here now that you might consider, that I think you should consider. I'm going to name Shane Conway, clubmate of mine that he is. I think is deserving of a mention for sure, and is deserving of a place actually on Mount Rushmore, because Kerry, there is actually hurling in Kerry as well, lads, just to let you know. Up in North Kerry is all hurling. And I don't think it's fair to consider this selection without considering the hurling people. So I'm going to suggest my club mate Shane Conway, double Fitzgibbon Cup winning hurler, outstanding talent, nationally regarded as a really brilliant hurling talent by a lot of great hurling people. So I think Shane has got to be in the mix. I think also, lads, you need to consider the ladies aspect and ladies football. Kerry ladies football had a golden era of success in the 80s and 90s, and I'm going to suggest also for consideration, and actually for a place in the interests of equity and fairness, a place for Mary Jo Curran, who was one of the star players on that great Kerry team that won 9, 10, 11 All-Irelands, I think, if I recall correctly, in the late 80s, early 90s. So I think you've got to consider the hurling people, lads, and you've got to consider also the female population and the female sports people. I'll mention also maybe Louise Galvin, who is a former Kerry footballer, now an international rugby player with Ireland in the Sevens game. Happens to be a club mate of mine as well, but sure, it's just there happens to be a lot of talent around my area of Lixnafanouig. We could probably do the sporting Mount Rushmore on our own, actually, and give you 4 people for selection, given the amount of talent we have around Lixnafanouig at the moment. But I suppose you've got to be kind of democratic about it. I think you could probably do a little bit better now in terms of democracy, lads, and equity in considering hurling and ladies football in the conversation. So I'll leave the rest with you boys, and up Kerry, take care.
Okay, Eoin, a bit of democracy. Yeah. Mary Jo Curran, stick her on.
Well, as I said earlier on,
well, she is 4 on my list, and if I was to make a change, it would be bringing her in and telling the boys with the chisels that Gooch is going on the corner forward mountain across the way.
There is no other mountain.
Well, look.
But there's lots of mountains, Owen. What are you talking about? There's mountains all over Kerry. We go to space.
You can make that change, Kieran. I would encourage you to make that change.
Louise Galvin is a great shout as well, and for the crack of it, and my role was to make a change. So if that's the rules and I have to do it, I am going to bring Gooch over to the corner forward mountain and put Mary Jo Curran in there, because I honestly believe if this girl was around right now, she'd be known throughout the country, and she'd be an icon of female athletes and ladies football. And she would, with that haul of medals, you look at the medals on the list. If you go from Paddy, who has 10 as a player and manager, Micheal, who has 12, and Mary Jo Curran, who has 10, there's an awful lot of medals on that list, and I would bring her in as the 4th, because of you can't like 10 All-Stars and 11 All-Ireland medals is crazy stuff, and 9 in a row is crazy, and I know this Cork team was unbelievable, and this current Dublin team were unbelievable, but I'd love that Kerry team of that time to be put on a virtual stick and put out there against them, because they were an amazing. I remember my sister played with the Stacks, and I remember going watching Marina Barry, who was on that team, and I remember just being at the game, and my jaw was on the floor at how good this girl was, and she would even say that Mary Jo was next level again. So it's I'll move Gooch over with Mikey and Maris Fitz, and we'll start Clifford's one. Clifford will be last.
Just for the sake of clarity, we had Conor Moore on, and he bottled it and didn't make a change. It was his choice. So it's your choice to make that change. You have the opportunity to keep Gooch if you want to.
No, I'm going to move him over to the other mountain.
No Gooch on your mountain?
No, I'll move him to the other one.
Oh,
there's 2. I'm telling you, we're commissioning 2. Like I don't get. We're commissioning 2. We've won for 3 of the most iconic corner forwards of all time in Ireland. Never mind Kerry. So I think they deserve a mountain by themselves.
Kerry's Mount Rushmore is finalised, if I'm right in saying this. Mick O'Connell, Mick O'Dwyer, Paddy O'Shea, and Mary Jo Curran.
Yeah, I'm happy enough with that.
Pretty good looking mountain, yeah.
Right.
It's, as you said, the amount of medals on that is absolutely incredible. It's absolutely delighted with that.
Congratulations, lads. Mount Rushmore's in the books.
OTB AM's Mount Rushmore.
Right. Less controversial than I thought it would be, I have to say. I can't believe Jacko's not on it, but what are you going to do? I mean, the fact that he lived in Kildare for most of his life was also obviously one of the massive plus points he had in it. Lads, thanks very much. Owen, I hope you survived today. Kieran, good job. Thanks a million.
All right, boys. Okay.
We'll be back tomorrow, 7:30 until 10 o'clock. We're going to have Floyd Landis on the show tomorrow talking about the second episode of the Lance Armstrong documentary and really about the rest of his career. If you missed anything from this morning, we have Micheal O'Muircheartaigh on, as well as the two lads helping us to pick Kerry's Mount Rushmore. He was in great form, talking about cocooning and quoting poetry to us, so flying fit. Kavitha Davidson joined us from Los Angeles to talk about what had happened overnight with regards to the escalating situation and the rioting right around the country. You can subscribe to the OTB AM podcast wherever you get your podcast stream. Best place is on the otbsports.com website. We'll see you tomorrow at 7:30. Make sure you stay tuned to the Off the Ball show on News Talk tonight. Good luck.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. OTB.